The year is 2021. COVID-19 has spread around the world, infecting and killing the majority of the population. The governments of the world have gone silent. There's no food on the shelves, no toilet paper. I'm holed up here in an abandoned building, weathering out a storm, cooking this can of beans I managed to find, scrounging around a ransacked grocery store. I've got only one single cylinder of .357 Magnum left in my Smith & Wesson 586 to protect myself against not only the other desperate survivors, but the hordes of brainless COVIDiots, mindlessly wandering the wasteland, ravenously looking to infect anyone they can. They said this pandemic was going to end us all. They were right, but that's not going to stop me from doing the show. Today is a very special coronavirus edition of the 2A Liberal podcast. I sat down with top Shot Champion Chris Cheng to discuss gun control and the recent spate of attacks on Asian Americans. We're going to be bringing back GunTuber Neverenuff Ammo to talk about his COVID experience. And I sat down with Magnus of the Boogaloo Boys Fame to discuss lies and misconceptions about the movement. All that and more, coming up next.
The Second Amendment Liberal Podcast.
Today I start off with a piece of advice, something that's been bugging me over this past election cycle. Many people need to hear and understand this. Those who seek genuine conversation, to challenge their ideas and preconceptions, learn how to debate and argue. Let me say that again. Learn how to debate and argue. Leave the ad hominems, the straw manning, the gaslighting at the door. Stop casting a wide, stereotypical net and concocting this reductive, cartoonish caricature of your opposition to make it easier to ignore the actual points they're making and attack said caricature. You're picking and choosing what you want to hear, so you can go on the attack and aren't required to actually defend your positions with logic and reason. Saying things loudly does not make your arguments more correct, nor establish any additional legitimacy in them. I'm willing to actually listen to people. I'm willing to actually, honestly defend my positions. What I am not willing to do is get dragged down into this game where you listen for certain key and buzzwords to pick apart and derail the conversation in order to portray me as a villain. These are the tactics of dishonest, brainwashed people who don't even truly believe in their own positions. In fact, they're afraid to analyze their positions closely because they know in the back of their mind they don't have a leg to stand on, thus the need to relentlessly attack and derail. Use actual evidence. Do not solely rely on outlying factors or gut feelings. Stop with the emotional manipulation. While emotions do have a place, considering the fact that we are all human beings, solely relying on emotional arguments and manipulative tactics is not honest, nor should it be relied upon to form substantive opinions. Screaming wild accusations at your opponent is not the same thing as debating. Do you want to win, or do you want to feel good? Do you want a better tomorrow, or do you want to feel good today at the expense of that better tomorrow? Your insane, radical behavior is turning off people who'd otherwise be your ally. This absolute and unshakable demand for ideological purity and submissive, unquestioning compliance that I see in those on the left and the right is leaving people like me, who take it upon ourselves to think for ourselves in a precarious position of having no allies. Authoritarians can't be trusted because they inevitably turn on their own. Eating their own is a natural consequence that comes from their fanatical ideologies. With that, I shall end with this. Authoritarians have this automatic revulsion and repulsion towards armed people because they are aware, no matter how subconsciously, that those whom they wish to control and subjugate when armed are not so easily corralled and victimized. And when I say armed, I'm not exclusively referring to firearms. I'm speaking about being armed with facts, being armed with knowledge, being armed with the ability to debate and argue correctly. Those who seek to control you do not have any interest in you being in possession of these characteristics. All right, I'm going to welcome back Neverenuff Ammo to the channel. We talked about a whole host of things, from the election to COVID-19 to 2020 gun purchases. It was a really interesting conversation, and I'm very glad to have him back. So without further ado, all right, can you give me a little test thing here?
Yes, testes, 1, 2, 3.
All right, I'm getting you loud and clear.
All right.
Okay, so how was your 2020?
Oh man, it was crazy. It was something else. I mean, I think it probably has been for everybody, but I mean, me and my whole family got COVID.
Heard about
back in August. My mother-in-law died from it.
Oh, I didn't hear about that.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really talked about it. A few of my friends know, but so that's been rough on my wife and my kids and everybody in the family.
I am sorry to hear about that.
Yeah. And I mean, just everything else that's been going on just with the putting aside the COVID, there's all the, well, I guess you can't put aside the COVID, but just the repercussions from it. And then, it's the economy and jobs and just everybody's mental state and everything that's going on. And then you've got obviously everything else that just decided to pop off this year, which is understandable, I guess, because, we were about 3.5 months in, I think, when stuff started getting rough. 3 months, let's call it 3 months in of, people being scared and locked down and buying guns and doing all this stuff. And then, people are going to break off somehow, and you got different groups, doing different stuff. I mean, for me, obviously, the closest I get to any of this stuff is talking about it on my daily shows. But
which you've been doing a hell of a job of lately, might I add, because you really stay on top of this stuff.
I try. It's I put, it's about a 30-45 minute show a day, and then I usually spend about an hour and a half before then. I try to wait as close to the time that I go live as possible. So if there's any stories that pop up last minute, I can have something to add in there. And it's something I like to do. I enjoy it. I like doing it.
As they say, let's circle back and let's talk about COVID. What was it like to actually have it?
So it literally affected everybody in my family differently. Like my 2 youngest girls had like a fever for maybe 12 hours, and then after about 24 hours seemed fine. My wife had stomach issues. I felt like I had the flu for about 3 days, and then it progressively got better after that. After about a week and a half, I no longer felt like I maybe had a light case of bronchitis and a sinus infection. The losing your taste of sense and smell has never happened to me before, and it was that lasted about a month,
so
and that was just weird.
Experienced that, like, legit?
Yeah. And it was weird. It was weird to not taste your food. Side note: I have figured out that even when you can't taste anything, you can still mostly taste nacho cheese Doritos, which goes to my theory they're not real food. But so that was something like when I was just dying to taste something, I would bust into a bag of Doritos because it was like at least I could taste it a little bit.
Well, they're bringing back that 3D shit, man. You better get on that.
Oh, I know. I saw that weird Matthew McConaughey commercial the other day, but
I don't even remember watching the fucking Super Bowl, but
yeah, I don't know why I did. It was I quit, but I quit sometime in the third quarter because I was boring. I was literally yawning, and I was like, well, this is clearly not entertaining me at all. I was falling asleep, but yeah, no, the COVID, it for me, and I think for most people, because I've now known many people who've had it. Just because I talked to so many people online, and I think for most of us, it was definitely. I feel like it was overblown. I feel like because I got in August, and up to that point, we had done, because my wife works in the medical field, and we had done the whole thing. We're constantly, she's making homemade alcohol wipes that we're keeping in our vehicles and wiping our hands down. We walk in the house, take off our clothes, go take a shower, spraying the floors wherever we walk with our dirty shoes and all that kind of stuff. And because it had just been so hyped up in the news, and even the news that I watch, which is not the mainstream stuff. I mean, I dip into mainstream stuff, when I'm looking for stories to see what people are saying, but it's not the stuff I pay attention to. But even, in all the little nooks and crannies of the internet and places where I go to try and get as best information as possible, obviously there was this level of fear, even though, you had the numbers of how many people were actually dying from it versus how many were getting it. And so there's still a level of fear because it's just the unknown, I think, more than anything else.
So let me get this right. You have a significant other that works in the medical field. Mm-hmm. You've had COVID. Your entire family had COVID. You know someone personally who died from it, and you're still saying it's overblown?
Yep, I am.
That kind of says a lot right there.
I am. It's overblown. Because since then we've really not maintained that regimen of worrying too much about germs since we've all had it. Mm-hmm. I feel it's overblown. Obviously not for, my mother-in-law, but she was older. She had COPD. She was, had other health issues. She had already gone through some surgeries and some things, and was drug resistant. Antibiotics. Her body resisted antibiotics, and they didn't work on her anymore. And it was unfortunately a perfect storm. And it was sad that it happened, obviously. I would do anything to have it not have happened, but it did. And I can look at it, and even my wife can look. Maybe even my wife says this is overblown.
Wow.
And she lost her mother. So,
wow.
But it is overblown. I'm not that, and I don't want to, because as I say that, and people are like, "Oh, you're a science denier." I'm not denying it. It sucked having it, and there are a lot of people dying from it mainly because it has such a high transmission rate compared to other things that we deal with on a regular basis, like the flu, right? Like the flu, kills people too. It just doesn't have a chance to kill that many people because it's not as easily transmissible as this thing, and I absolutely understand that. But going by the actual data and statistics and science and everything I'd looked into, and talking to doctors that, work with my wife and that kind of stuff, it's something to be concerned about. It is not something to be terrified of. There's a difference. There's caution. And as I'm a prepper. I've been a prepper for 15 years, long before it was cool. And, my wife's of the same mentality, and we always prepare for the worst and hope for the best and that kind of thing. It's definitely something to be cautious about, and I understand why people are concerned. It's serious, and I anybody who says it's not serious is an idiot. But it's not something to be terrified over. I mean, unless you're
concerns me is not so much the virus itself; it's the crackdown we're getting from the powers that be that concerns me primarily. Do you have any concerns in that arena? The response to this.
Yeah, well, I mean, as I said, I think the whole thing was overblown. The response was overblown. I think much as we would normally do during flu season, we should have done everything we could to protect those people that are most susceptible. I mean, every year you hear stories about some 25-year-old bodybuilder who died from the flu. I mean, it happens. That does happen. But that doesn't mean every flu season everybody starts putting on masks every time they go to Walmart. No matter how healthy they are. If you're susceptible, if you're older, if you have pre-existing conditions and things like that, obviously nursing homes. My wife has worked in nursing homes before. They take flu season very seriously. All those precautions should have been put in play. And yeah, let people know what's going on, and yeah, don't downplay it. It's serious. It's I believe that, what is it, 10 times more transmissible than the flu. That's serious, But as far as how everybody responded to it, I think there was a level, depending on what powers that be, whether it's media, whether it's the government, whatever. And then once you get to the government, it's which side of the political aisle are they on? Everybody took advantage of this situation for their own personal gain. I think the media did. I think definitely politicians did. And again, it's not to say there's not a reason to be cautious. I absolutely think there was. I take it very seriously. It hit my family very hard. But they absolutely took advantage of the situation to push for things that would benefit them. I think primarily the left did. It's not that the right wouldn't. It's not that I would put it past the right in this country to take advantage of that situation. Had the roles been reversed and it had been an election year where there was a Democrat president, the Republicans probably would have done the exact same thing that the Democrats did, right, as far as pushing it and, trying to, max out the fear and all that. I mean, the difference being that I think they would have the only news media source they would have had on their side is Fox, as opposed to having, the collective, mainstream ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, all that crap.
Everything in unison. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe it would have been a little bit harder for them to push that fear, but don't think they wouldn't have done it, just like the left did in an election year.
For sure.
And they did. They made people terrified, and they successfully got. And whether you want to say it's coordinated or not, I don't know. I mean, did Gavin Newsom and Cuomo and Pelosi and Schumer all sit down and decide how they're going to, determine these lockdowns? I have no idea. Probably not.
Gonna rule it out.
But I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know, because look, they wanted to get rid of Donald Trump, and it was the perfect storm for them. It was the perfect little gift that dropped into their lap. Look, we've got all this. We've got collective media. We can use this against him, and it was great. One of the I don't want to say great. It was great for them. I don't pick sides on this type of stuff. I wasn't exactly a Donald Trump fan, nor am I a Democrat fan.
Yeah,
so
Donald Trump, but you know what? When something is as transparent as what did go down against him happened, I'm not going to deny it.
Yeah. Well, it was funny because I loved it played out perfectly in that first month. Which was end of February or mid-February to mid-March when they first started taking everything seriously. As soon as it came down, it was hilarious because you saw Donald Trump come out and go, all right, we're putting in a travel ban to China. We know that's where it's coming from right now. We're putting in a travel ban to China, and everybody screamed racist. And then 1 month later, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer were coming out going, he didn't act soon enough. He doesn't care. He's not taking this seriously. Right. Well, because you called him a racist when he tried to do something about it. Right. Like, legit. Like, there's no winning there. And again, I don't care about Donald Trump. He's a giant douchebag. I do think he was probably maybe the lesser of two evils back in 2016 because I hate the Clintons and everything. Yeah. But I don't care about Donald Trump. But it was so obvious and blatant that they were just completely hypocritical. It's like he was racist, and then 4 weeks later he didn't do enough because he didn't push for more travel bans. That's when they were saying, well, why didn't you put a ban on people from Italy or the UK or everywhere else? Because those people hadn't put in bans from China, so people were still going from China to there and then from there to here. So he didn't do enough. He didn't take it seriously. That's because the first travel ban he put down, you called him a racist.
Correct.
So I don't. Yeah. What did you want him to do?
See, I know I'm further to the left than you are, maybe not by that much. So I tend to have circles of family and friends that are on the left, definitely more to the left than you are. And just hearing the contradictory things, the propaganda that they've all swallowed against Donald Trump. And again, I'm not a Donald Trump fan, but it's just so blatant and in your face of what was really going on. And that was detrimental, I think, to the response to COVID. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it got to the point, and honestly, it had been like this before COVID, but it certainly happened several times during COVID where I found myself saying, "Dear God, please make me stop defending him."
Yes.
I don't want to defend him.
Yes.
I don't want to, but you're just blatantly lying. You're just blatantly lying and making things up. Like, and I can't, and I use my big mouth and not afraid of confrontation. Don't have a problem, calling somebody out when they're wrong. But they just, and they did this. They've done it since, the election in 2016. They've just constantly have done this stuff. And again, it's like, I don't want to defend the dude. Okay. I didn't vote for him. If you look at my YouTube channel throughout 2016, I made multiple videos trashing the dude.
Who did you vote for this time?
This last time, I did vote for Donald Trump against Biden.
You did.
I did not vote for him in 2016. I just hated the thought of it. But I voted for him because, and there's a video on my channel explaining what it was. But first of all, I like Joe Jorgensen.
That's who I voted for.
And I wanted to vote for her, but I was concerned. And like I said, I made a video on my channel this time around. I said, if this election is contested, they're going to find a way to put this down to the popular vote. And there's a chance that this could be one of those times that even if you do, like for me, I live in Texas, so I've never been afraid to not vote for the Republican because the Republican's going to win anyway. Like, right. It's a no-brainer, right? Like I've been very, very happy that I can always vote Libertarian or Constitution. I did vote Constitution Party one time. Because I'm not a fan of the Republicans, and I never have been. And while I think I probably have a little more in common with them, I would say I have a little more in common with them in what they say they believe in. Then they never do anything about it. They say they're for freedom and liberty and individual rights and smaller government, but then they go and they vote for things that are against individual freedom and liberty and rights and are for bigger government. So I would say I have more in line with what they say they're for. Yeah, I've had the luxury of living in Texas of not having to vote Republican, and I know the Republican will always win, but I was concerned that if the election was contested, which I knew it would be, which that's a whole other hilarious story, but that it might actually come down to them starting to count votes and okay, who got more votes? And I was like, you know what? So I'm going to suck it up and I'm going to do something I don't want to do because I think this might be a year where your vote might actually make a difference. And I think it was. I think it absolutely proved to be that. Every little single vote counted, and so many people turned out to vote.
I agree.
And, but it was with a heavy heart that I did it. I didn't want to do it, but I thought it might actually make a difference. And quite honestly, I didn't want, and I knew there was a very good chance that they were going to win the Senate and they weren't going to lose the House, although they lost far more seats than I thought they would.
Yeah, same.
But I knew that I knew there was at least a 50-50 shot they would get the Senate. And I would rather have I would rather have nothing happen in Washington than the wrong things happen in Washington. So my thinking was, and of course I'm rationalizing with myself because I'm trying to tell myself, and I have been since I voted for him, that I'm doing it for the right reasons,
Well, I think anyone that's watched your content for any extended period of time knows you don't like Republicans and you're not a fan of Trump. So I think your vote has more meaning than some mindless Trump tard out there that just loves him for some inexplicable reason. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I never understood the Trump train, the MAGA hat wearing stuff. I don't get it. It is ridiculous. I don't. They look. What I think it is, and this is what I've come to assess from just people I know that were maybe not completely those type of people. I don't really hang out with anybody who owns a MAGA hat, but people who were definitely on the Trump train.
Right.
I think I've assessed that it wasn't about Trump, and I don't think it ever was about Trump. He was the kind of hollow windbag that showed up at the right time and said the right things that people could just put all their anger and frustration on him and just be like, well, he's my guy. And I don't think it was because Trump was Trump. I think it was because Trump represented to each person out there that voted for him, was like a physical representation of that anger. It was because I know people straight up who said they voted for Trump in 2016 because they just wanted to lob a hand grenade into Washington. And honestly,
I know liberals who did that. Yes.
I can't blame them. You know, we've been consistently lied to by Republicans and Democrats my entire lifetime, and certainly going much farther back than that. And you know, when you look at everything that we've dealt with, and then of course, you know, for me being libertarian, and even though I sit here and I try to have conversations with people, and I'm like, look, I want, and it's the meme, right? It's the libertarian meme. I want gay couples to defend their marijuana crops with AR-15s. Like that's legitimately where I'm at. We need to decriminalize drugs, reform the justice system. The fucking prison system is just a clusterfuck here. We need to legalize marijuana. We need to let everybody own what they want, marry who they want to marry, live your life the way you want. As long as you're not infringing on anybody else, it doesn't matter. And everybody should shut up about how you want to live your life. Agreed. And I try to have those conversations with people, but yet, especially once I got, you know, online, I've been doing it for 11 years now.
Wow.
I just legitimately, for the entirety of my online life, because I made my opinions public, because I was pro-gun, and because because I am a white, and because I'm straight, I've been called a racist, sexist, homophobe more times than I can count. And I'm like, and that's the go-to, right? And you don't have to prove it. You don't have to use it. It's if you're having a conversation that you don't have an answer to, or you don't want to deal with the logic because it goes against what you've been told to think by whoever, whether that's your parents, your friends, your family, the media, whatever. The thing to do is, oh, you're a racist, or you're a sexist, or you're a homophobe, right? Sure. The new one, of course, is just you're a Nazi. Everybody's a fucking Nazi now. Sorry,
I've had my own family tell me that the reason why I support the Second Amendment and I'm not on board with the Democrats and far left ideology is that I let white people control my mind online.
Yeah, and I just don't get it. And so I bring that up because I understand the frustration. I understand why people just wanted to vote for Donald Trump, who was not a politician, who was harsh and offensive and just something completely different than what we had. He wasn't Obama. He wasn't Bush. He wasn't Clinton. He wasn't Bush Sr. He was unlike anything that we've seen in our lifetimes. And I understand, you know, a decade of just getting called a racist, sexist, homophobe, a Nazi, or whatever else. I understand the frustration. I understand people just want to go, you know what, screw it. I'm just going to vote for the orange dude. Like,
so how do you explain the Biden victory this time? Do you think it was just fatigue? Are people just fucking tired of hearing about Trump 24/7?
No, honestly, what I think is that it was, how do I say this? I'm going to say something that's going to sound ridiculous, but I think it was the ultimate election interference. But it wasn't from who all the Trump supporters think it was. It was 4.5 to 5 years. Actually, I'll say 4.5. From the minute he was chosen as the nominee in 2016, it was 4.5 years of the media and Hollywood and every politician who you put a microphone in front of, just as we talked about, lying. Now, sometimes it was true, but literally telling people he was Hitler, that, you know, it could not stand, that he was the worst person in the world, that he was Satan, that he wanted to kill gay people and black people, and that he's the most racist POS that's ever lived. And it's just 4.5 years of that.
I agree.
I
don't see anything wrong with that.
Yeah, and it was just that, and I think that's what did it. You know, that's what did it. It was just beating people over the head with how horrible of an individual he was, with how he's the next Hitler, and again he wants to see, you know, all these minority groups. He wants you dead, you know.
Right.
As if he, you know, was in the KKK. Except, oh wait, no, those were Democrats. Sorry.
Oh, don't even bring that up. They're gonna say, you know, the party switched, yada yada, blah blah blah.
That's a whole other debate, but yeah, I think it was that. You know, I think that's what did it. They spent 4.5 years scaring a whole lot of people, and because when you have basically everywhere you go, every outlet you go to, whether that's you're at the movies, you're watching TV, watching a commercial, on the internet, social media, on certain websites, watching the news, listening to a politician, every single person is telling you that he's the next Hitler and that he wants to kill you and he wants to, he hates you. And then of course, don't even get me started on the alt-right crap that popped up, because that was just that was the people on the right absolutely just making the wrong call, because essentially what you had there was, and I remember having conversations, me and Yankee would get on chats and yell at people in the chat.
Right.
When this alt-right stuff started popping up and going, those are racist, right? And the response we got for about a year was, no, they're not. They're just the alt-right. They're tired of this and that, and they're just Trump supporters and this and that. And then, of course, after about a year, when it became very evident that, what's his name, Richard Spencer?
Yes.
And people were, pulling out video of him going, we are no longer white supremacists, we are the alt-right, like him literally saying he's rebranding. Yes. And then people started going, oh shit, I've been calling myself the alt-right for the last year. Oh shit. And they were like, yeah, no wonder people are calling you racist. And then you had Charlottesville, which was just a clusterfuck, and the right did itself no favors, because a lot of people on the right were willing to, as soon as they heard, oh, it's the alt-right, it's more conservative people, it's more this, it's more that, but they're not racist, and you're looking at it objectively from me, from a libertarian perspective, going, that's a bunch of racists getting you to call yourself a racist, right? Like, I'm not racist. Well, you're literally joining up with a group that started out calling themselves white supremacists. They just decided to rebrand, and they're like, no, that's not true. Okay, go ahead. Yeah, just keep sharing all your Pepe memes and stuff.
They ended up screwing all of us, because I know you're aware of the Boogaloo Boys, correct?
Oh, yes, of course.
And the mainstream narrative is that they're just a bunch of white supremacists, they're alt-right, and it's just not true. I interviewed Magnus the other day, the guy that was on Jimmy Dore. I don't know if you're aware, but he gave some speech in front of a Capitol somewhere, and he was saying things that people on the left agree with, like being against giant corporations controlling every aspect of our lives, ending these wars overseas, things like that, addressing socioeconomic things. And people were just shocked that a Boog boy was saying these things. So Jimmy Dore had him on, and people were accusing Jimmy Dore of giving airtime to a white supremacist, which is not fucking true. So I want to know, how aware are you of the Boog Boys, and what is your personal opinion of them?
I mean, the individuals who I've seen in interviews and things, and seen some videos pop up online, and you see stuff, and I don't follow any one of these particular groups very closely. I obviously don't associate with any of them, or try. I don't like putting myself in a group of people like that. So
same, yeah.
I try to avoid those things, but I look at them probably very similar to the way I look at the Proud Boys or some of these other groups. I mean, there's good and bad in all of them. I'm sure in most of these groups, the intentions started out good. I know a lot of people like to say the Proud Boys are all a bunch of racists. I've gotten to talk to some of them. What I find hilarious is they were saying the Proud Boys were a bunch of racists when they're there's whole chapters of Black and Hispanic Proud Boys, over in California and in LA and stuff, and they're like, they're a bunch of I'm like, are you sure you're talking about the same people? But they may be abrupt and aggressive or whatever, and I don't agree with their tactic, which is to go intentionally out and pick fights, go and antagonize the groups and then wait for them to swing first so that they can swing harder. So I don't agree with their tactics. The Boog Boys are, I would definitely say they're a little better than that. I don't think they go out and, well, to my knowledge, intentionally instigate things. But, I'm not really a fan of any of these groups, even though I kind of associate them all together. And I know they're different groups, and some do good things, some do bad things, and I just don't think it's smart. I guess is my thing. I believe as coming together as individuals and making it known that we are individuals. Once you start to groupthink in any scenario like that, when you're coming together and saying, you're not just coming together and saying, I'm an individual who believes in these things. You're saying, I'm a Boog boy. You know what I mean? Or whatever it is. Or I'm a Proud Boy. And now you're associating yourself with some membership or, website or whatever it is. And I think things can start to take a turn there, because to me, you're kind of giving up a little bit of your individuality in favor of kind of the group, whatever that may be. And that may sound stupid for some people, but that's just how I kind of look at it. So I'm not really a big fan of any of these groups that pop up, even though I objectively don't have a problem with them as long as they're not, acting in ways they shouldn't, and I'm like I said, all that stuff that happened in Charlottesville, completely insane. And those people are psychotic and, whatever. Yes. The Proud Boys, they go out and they instigate stuff. I'm not a fan of that. I don't think that's true. I haven't heard of anything the Boog Boys themselves have actually gone out and done other than counter protests. So I don't know if they're in trouble for anything.
Well, apparently all they've done is protect Black Lives Matter protests and actually have gotten into fist fights with the Proud Boys. So they're definitely not white supremacists. If you're an armed white dude, the news is going to call you a fucking white supremacist,
Oh yeah, I mean it's without a doubt. It doesn't matter. You're just associated with that at this point. And apparently so are libertarians. I've been hearing this floating around the news too. Apparently libertarians are now on the list of least not, but libertarians are now on the list as like, we're getting grouped together with terrorists. I'm like, what?
Yes, but I've heard of this. It's so fucking ridiculous.
That's a whole. I mean, that's just insane. I saw that. I've seen that now pop up. Once in an article on Vice or Vox, I can't remember which of V it was, and then once on CNN and once on MSNBC, actually in an interview where you had, one was with this guy who was he was one of these experts on cult leaders because he had gotten pulled into the Moonies for like 3 or 4 years, to which I'm saying, not that much of an expert if you fucking got caught up in it for 4 years, but whatever. And he came out and said something, and he was listing off all these radicalized groups, and it was like, it was terrorists, and it was this, and it was that, and it's libertarians. And I'm like, whoa, wait, what? What?
Yeah, that's fucking crazy.
And then they did it on CNN too with some guy, some specialist who was having a conversation about, they were talking about how Trump supporters are, nuts and need to be deprogrammed and all this stuff. And then again, he starts rattling off a list of all these people we have to watch and be careful of, one of which was libertarians. I'm like, what? Are you kidding me? Like, how is being a libertarian anywhere close to being, I mean, we're not terrorists, but we're not even to the level, like we're just another party that believe in certain things that should be, in my opinion, pretty like milk toast across the board. Like the idea of believing in individual freedom and liberty above everything else.
Shit, dude. Just common fucking sense.
That benefits everybody as far as I'm concerned. Then you can live your life how you want to live. Like I would think both sides would be on board with that ideology. But instead, I think they spend all their time fighting about their differences. I'm like, well, why? Is it just because you want to fight at this point, I guess?
Well,
that's the only thing I can think of.
The past couple of years have taught me is that there's a lot of motherfuckers out there who have no interest in you having individual freedom.
Oh, yeah. Oh, exactly. Yeah, they want you to live by their rules. They want you to live by whatever their moral compass is, whatever that is. And no, I'm sorry. I'm not down with that. I don't care what it is. You've got people on one side that say, you've got people on one side that are saying everybody's going to go to hell if you don't worship Jesus and all this stuff and everything else and whatever. And then people on the other side are literally having conversations about whether or not white people have a place in modern society. It's like, okay, there's a problem here on both sides. You've got one side advocating for, they should be able to tell you who you can marry and what you can ingest into your body and, whether or not their religious beliefs should constrict your lifestyle. And the other side saying that you, I guess nowadays, have to be a half black, half Latino, trans, non-binary gay person to even, I don't know, have a voice in society, because if you're not, then you shouldn't be speaking on anything, and you're probably just a racist, sexist, homophobe.
Well, so I'm a black man, so according to that one SJW ideology bullshit article that came out, they said that straight black men are what did they say? Straight black men are the straight white men of black people, or some bullshit like that. So
I think I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, because but no, see, because here's the problem. So first of all, there's a hierarchy, and that's problem number one. There shouldn't be a hierarchy. That's where individual freedom and liberty puts everybody on the same playing field, regardless of race, sex, gender, who you want to fuck, I don't care. We're all on the same level playing field, which is what I believe, and I think that's where we start. But to the left, there's a hierarchy, and it's a hierarchy of many things, part of which is victimhood, and who needs the most help up, who needs the most whatever you want to call it. And for a long time, it was if you were black, you were at the top of that. And now that's not true anymore. At the top is trans, and then it is gay, and then it is women, and then it is Latinos, and then it is, or excuse me, I should say Hispanic. My wife would slap me if I called her a Latina. She prefers Hispanic. And don't dare call her Mexican. Dear God, she will lose it.
What about Latinx?
Anyway, and then black is after that.
Right.
And you can see it as their hierarchy of what special group needs to get special attention this day in identity politics. They shuffle around the people who used to be there based on their identity or the color of their skin or whatever. And I say that stuff sometimes, and I'll be talking to somebody, and I guess I come across a little flippant about it or something. I don't know, because I've been told before that when I use that example, it makes it seem like I'm not caring about any of those people in that hierarchy. And to the contrary, I do. I'm like one of the first people, and one of the only people in the YouTube gun community that has been for years acknowledging the problems we have when it comes to things like policing in this country.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I've been advocating. I remember the first time I really the Trayvon Martin thing, when that happened. What was that, 2012?
Yeah, around there.
It was around 2012. And I came out and said, well, George Zimmerman is clearly an asshole. And George Zimmerman clearly instigated this whole fucking thing, and everybody in the gun community, because, we've got to be for whoever the gun owner is, jumped all over me. And that was the first time I lost like a whole bunch of subs. Of course, I didn't have a lot back then anyway, but comparatively speaking, for how many I had, I lost a bunch. And, because I clearly that was a bad situation. And as we've since learned, George Zimmerman has been in trouble nonstop ever since then, proving he's an asshole. And I've been talking about the stuff that's been going on whenever you see these police shootings and all this kind of stuff for years and years and years. I'm not a fan of police. I think we are over policed. I think I'm rabidly against the militarization of police that we've seen in this country, that Democrats and Republicans have both fostered.
Yes. Okay.
It's not one side or the other. It's Democrats in the federal government. It is Democrats and Republicans who have both fostered this. Let's get them federal funding. Let's give them federal training. Let's give them military. Let's instill these types of mindsets. Let's have them looking for these types of people. And then of course down on the ground in the cities too. What I find very fascinating, sad, that in all the worst cities in this country where there is police brutality, all run by Democrats, almost exclusively run by Democrats. They'll have a Democrat mayor and a Democrat police chief, and that's where the shit happens. I find it funny that the right gets blamed for police brutality all the time. Although at the same time, then it's the idiot, I want freedom and liberty and I want to keep my guns, but I'm going to lick this cop's boot. Right. Are you kidding me? Who do you think is going to show up to take your guns if they pass some law? It's going to be the cops. Why are you on the cop's side? Aren't you supposed to be for freedom and liberty? So I've never understood this. I think both sides, the way they deal with cops is completely insane. The right preaches freedom and liberty and my guns, which I'm down with, but then lick boots. And then the left talks about how nobody needs a gun, just call a cop, but let's defund police. Right. They're completely back-asswards, and it doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. But I think we do have clear problems with policing in this country. And I've been talking about it for a long time, and but I'm still a racist, I guess, because I'm white. I don't know.
You're the only GunTuber I know of who regularly has gay people and people of all sorts of different races and people that think differently than you on your live streams. I can't think of a single other YouTuber who does the same. And that's one reason why I like to have you on my podcast, because you're a little different than the average GunTuber kind of guy. Which is sad, because here's the funny thing about it. All the people that I have on my show, so I've got Ray, who's recently trans, and I've known her
since she was a him back in 2011. Okay. Been a friend of mine for a very long time. And she's like a regular on my show. And then there's Gray Jedi, the gay Jedi. Let's be honest here. A lot of my subscribers, I mean, these people have been on my show for a long time, and these are all pro-gun people.
Yes.
So the fact that we don't see these people represented in podcasts and things like that more, or with in the gun community is sad, because they're there. There's a reason why there's an organization called the Pink Pistols and Armed Equality and all these other groups out there. Okay, these are groups that, in my opinion, are just as big a part of the gun community, or at least should be, as any of the rest of us. And people don't. I don't know. I guess because I think part of it, and part of it, in all honesty, is well, I think it's twofold, or threefold. Let's go threefold. One, there is a part of the gun community that either is bigoted, or, especially if you're talking about YouTube gun channels, or people who are in the media side of YouTube, maybe they themselves are not bigoted, but they're afraid their subscribers or their followers are, so they won't delve into those topics. Okay, that's tier one. Tier two is, the other problem is, I don't think enough people in the gun community, whether that's online or at your local gun shop, actually go out of their way to try, because I think you have to go out of your way to try and make those connections with people who are not just straight white males, right? Who are the people that are black or gay or trans or whatever it is that traditionally, which is stupid, but that we're traditionally not, you don't think of those people when you think of the gun owners of America, right?
And I'll tell you why. Because, and I experienced this with my mother. She was scared to death the first time I was taking her to a gun store. She thought we were going to walk in there and then people would just fucking break out the fucking white hoods and shit. Like, no. Yeah. No, it's not, you're being lied to. I think there's an element of popular consciousness that actively prevents non-fat white Republican straight men from feeling comfortable to be armed.
And that's the third tier, right? That's the third tier. And it's those people don't usually seek it out.
Yes.
Because they've been told, just through everything. And what's sad about that is, like, there's a time when your mother was probably right. There is a time when the first gun laws we had in this country, the first gun control we had in this country, was to keep black people from owning guns.
Yep.
And it's sad. So there was some truth to that, and that's something that needs to be fixed. And we need to get people to realize that is not the case anymore. Maybe there's some podunk, West Alabama gun shop that still has that or something. I don't know. But no gun shop I've certainly been in would treat anybody like that.
Same. Never experienced it, ever.
I mean, one of the guys at my local gun shop is a gay Hispanic dude. Like, it's by and large not the case anymore. And I think that's, we need to get that out there, because I think these groups are important, to specifically in this case to gun ownership, because I think that's one thing that the Democrats have gotten right. They've even though I think they've done it completely for the wrong reasons. I think that the Democrats just learned in the 1960s that the only way forward was they're never going to stop the desegregation of our country, and they're never going to get back to slavery. So the best thing they can do is just use all these people that they would normally hold down as a voting bloc. So let's just promise them all this stuff and cater to them, and we'll always have their vote. And I think they still do that today. Yes, I think they still do that today. They've just expanded. It's no longer just the black community, it's the Hispanic community, it's the trans community, it's the gay community, it's anybody that they can hang that victimhood badge on and go, you're oppressed, your life is bad.
Yes.
Never mind the fact that it's mostly bad because the Democrats are running your city, but we won't mention that. But your life sucks and you're a victim of the establishment and the white man, so vote for us and we'll fix all your problems. And they've been very effective at that. And that's sad that that's happened. But I understand why people who have traditionally been put upon. I mean, there's no doubt whatsoever that in this country, up until very recently, if you were trans, you had a higher likelihood of being violently attacked, all kinds of other stuff. Before that, if you were gay for decades and decades, you had to maybe hide what you were. There's a reason why there's a term coming out of the closet, because a lot of people wouldn't react well to it. So a lot of people stayed in the closet. And before that, it was people who were black were treated like shit in this country, you know? So there's real reasons behind it, which is why I think it is important.
So,
I think it was very smart of the Democrats to do it, but I think I want to do it in the gun community for real, like, because I actually do give a shit. Yeah. You know,
and I can tell you, and you've been putting your money where your mouth is for what, 11 years you said on YouTube?
Yeah, I started January or February 2010. It was when I first
let's take
started.
all this talk of these demographics, and let's circle back again to guns in 2020. So I want to know, did anyone who was not previously armed or not adequately armed ask to borrow or buy a gun from you in 2020?
Yes. My brother and sister-in-law, and I gave them a shotgun. Yeah. Now, that being said, that's not that big a deal because my brother-in-law has owned guns before, but then he sold them and stuff. I've been asked many questions online by people about guns that are like, I'm buying my first gun. Oh, actually, I sold 2 guns this year to people, and it was their first firearm, actually, here locally. I had some guns. I sell guns occasionally. I always try to have a net gain. You know, I always like to, end off a period with more guns than I had. But occasionally I do sell some that I'm not using or whatever. And this year happened to be a really good year to sell guns because people are paying, are just seeking out guns and paying ridiculous prices. And I sold 3 guns this year that I had not used. You buy gun. I don't know, but for me, guns are like, it's like a hobby. Sometimes I just walk into a gun store. Ooh, that's cool. That's cheap. And you just buy something you had no intention to buy. So you end up with stuff sometimes that you don't really use. So, I sold 3 guns that I was never going to shoot this year. And 2 of those people were first-time gun buyers. And I sat down, both of them. One was a professor from a school up in McAllen. He was an immigrant from Nigeria. And we sat there and talked for about an hour and a half outside the gun shop. And I was just talking to him. We were talking about all kinds of stuff. And he was also very libertarian as well. He said he knows a lot of people that have that libertarian mindset from where he's from in Nigeria. It was a very cool conversation. And so I sold him an AR-15 that I wasn't going to use, and then I sold a Kel-Tec Sub 2000 to a guy who had just moved from Washington down here for work. Him and his wife.
A Gen 1 or Gen 2?
Gen 2.
Good guns.
Yeah, they're pretty good. I liked it. I mean, for me, look, I bought this gun because it was basically the ultimate Glock 17 accessory. Like, that's really the only, because it takes the Glock 17 mags, and I'm like, hey, I can have fun at the range with it. I did not buy it for any serious reason. And, I was like, whatever. And so it was just a gun I wasn't going to use. I sold it to him, and with him, I mean, I think I sat there for about 45 minutes, and I showed him how to use the gun, and we talked a little bit, and he's like, "Oh, this is my first gun," that kind of stuff. So that's a couple of things that I've been through this year. As far as people, a lot of new gun owners out there this year, which I am glad. I'm glad that there are people seeing that this is something that is important. Being able to take care of yourself is important, especially when you've got a movement that is in my opinion, showing some of the not showing, but trying to get it out there that there is a bad side to this over policing that we have. But the opposite side of that is then sometimes you're going to have to defend yourself, and I'd much rather do that than have a militarized police force.
I agree.
I'm much better with that. And so, and that, of course, that gets into all the Black Lives Matter movement stuff, and that's a whole different thing.
That's a whole other conversation.
There's 2 sides to that, because that's, there's Black Lives Matter, the movement, and there's Black Lives Matter, the organization. And the organization is a Marxist piece of shit, in my opinion. I've looked into them for years, and I absolutely hate them as an organization. If you look at the stuff they're tied to and the people they do business with and how they filter millions of dollars through their organization, and they pay their top employees through donations to go and consult in areas around the country. And then, his consulting fee is $250,000. Oh, okay. And that's just people's donation money and stuff. Black Lives Matter, the movement, I actually agree with, as long as it's not the let's go burn everything down side of it. But the people that are actually marching when, and I've talked about this one ad nauseum, because I remember to me this was, well, they both kind of happened. They happened about 3 weeks apart from each other, which is George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Breonna Taylor was first. That was the one that happened first, and then I think George Floyd was either 2 or 3 weeks later. And I remember talking about this when it happened. It was absolutely a horrible, horrible thing, and people need to start talking about this shit because it does happen. Absolutely. I don't think it happens to the extent that some people want to make it seem like. I hear people out there talking about how every time a black person sees a police officer, they have a 1 in 5 chance of dying or something like that. Right. I mean, some of the stuff that people are pushing out is like, okay, that's a little much, but this stuff does happen. I mean, what happened to Breonna Taylor? And I've heard so many people, and this is what kills me. Is I've heard so many people in the gun community try and just dig and look and, well, her ex was a drug dealer. What about that? Oh, that gives you permission to just start shooting through walls and kill her? Right. What?
Yeah. I've heard the same shit.
I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, there's no excuse for what happened. There's no excuse for what happened to her, period. There's no excuse for what happened to George Floyd. I hear all these people coming out, well, he had fentanyl in his system. Yeah, but two medical examiners already said he died from pressure on his neck. Like, it doesn't matter if he was completely coked up. That's not what killed him. You know what I mean? And so you have those things happening. And so I absolutely, I'm not Mr. Pro Police. And I absolutely agree there are problems, and so I guess I don't have a problem with the Black Lives Matter movement as a movement, and it just obviously there are a lot of people, there are a lot of criminals, and a lot of people that are taking advantage of that movement. Those are the ones that are, burning down buildings and burning down cars and stuff. Like I'm like, and I'll be honest, I've said this from the beginning. I don't care if you want to focus that energy at the cops, go for it, man. I don't care.
I've said the same thing.
If you want to go light cop cars on fire and throw rocks through, windows at the police station, that kind of stuff, cool. But you're burning down just neighborhood businesses. You're attacking just people that live in the neighborhood. You're you're doing, like, how does that help? If you actually care about the Black Lives Matter movement, how does that help? It doesn't.
Well, that's the thing. It actively did not help. Most of the people that were driven to me to acquire firearms and training throughout the COVID period in 2020, it wasn't the disease of COVID that actually made them want to get armed. It was people seeing mom and pop shops getting burnt the fuck down.
Yeah, absolutely. So absolutely. And who can blame them? Who can blame them? I mean, when you're seeing that, I mean, I'm fortunate enough that I live in an area of Texas that we haven't had anything, and we never will. It's just not going to happen down here. But can you imagine living in a big city where you're seeing this stuff happen? Or even in a suburb of a big city or whatever. I mean, so it's I understand that completely, and it good on those people for figuring it out, man.
Right.
I mean, I'm glad they are.
So now we talked about people asking you for guns. What gun purchases did you make in 2020, if any at all?
So I started off with a Grand Power Street Bog.
Nice choice.
And that was before COVID. I love that thing. I have not gotten to shoot it a lot since all our ranges have been closed, but for the first couple of months of the year, 2020, I got to shoot it. So I got that one. I got a Stoeger over under. That's kind of like a tactical shotgun. It's got lots of rails and stuff on it.
What is that one called? The Stoeger Double Defense.
Something like that. Something like that. And it's got a lot of rails and stuff on it. I got it because for about 6 months, actually longer than that, from about October of 2019 all the way up to like May 2020, me and some of the guys that are in on the chats, we were just going full bore on Call of Duty for like months and months and months until I just got tired of downloading like 40 gig updates to this thing, and it was eating up my entire hard drive on my Xbox. And so I kind of got inspired by the what do they call it in the game? There's a tactical over under shotgun that's ridiculously OP. I can't remember what it's called. It's like this something 725 or something. Anyway, I was like, I found this thing for like $250. I'm like, I'm gonna buy it. I want to buy the gun from Call of Duty. And then I bought an SKS this year as well.
Nice. I'm SKS.
Yeah, I bought an SKS because it was on sale for $250, but that was early on in the year before prices shot up.
Russian, Chinese, Yugoslav?
Chinese, just cheap Chinese one.
Okay.
Then let's see. Then I went for a while and didn't buy anything. I feel like I'm gonna miss something here, but I also bought a Beretta 92A1.
Oh, very nice. I just got an FS.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I didn't have a Beretta in my collection. I've been wanting one for a while, and so they had one at Bud's really cheap, and I was like, oh, cool. And then, well, we're already into 2021. I mean, I just slapped together an AR-15. Honestly, just for the purposes of like an informational informational video, which I posted today, which is basically, hey, how cheap can you build an AR-15 right now? And I managed to put one together for $570.
That is right around what I put mine together for last year. Yep.
Yeah, and I was like, in COVID, you know, in that's before times prices. So so I was like, okay, so, and I made a video and all that kind of stuff, but that was just this year. I don't know if that counts. I just finished that one here. So yeah, that was pretty much what I got. I feel like I missed something, but I don't know what.
Yeah, I got a lot of shit this year. I got a FNX 45, a Beretta 92
nice.
FS.
Is it the 45 or the 45 tactical?
Just the regular 45, with a stainless steel slide.
I've been wanting one of those tacticals for years, and they're just so expensive. I have a hard time dropping that much money on them. They're like $1,200, man.
Right. But you know what? I'm actually going to do a 460 roll-in conversion to mine, so that's why I didn't get
nice.
a tactical version. Yeah, so
yeah,
that
cool.
didn't make sense to me. I got a APX carry, which I am a huge fan of the Beretta APX series. It's the best striker-fired pistol on the market as far as I'm concerned.
I don't know why they haven't caught on more than they have.
Those are excellent pistols.
They really are good guns. I don't know. They're excellent guns. They're very affordable. And for some reason, like, you just don't hear a lot of people talking about them, and I don't know why. I really don't know why.
Slide. It just turns people off.
It is kind of a funky looking slide, but I don't know. I kind of like it. It kind of looks cool.
It's a fucking great gun, man. I mean, I also got my first SIG P226. Great gun.
Very nice.
Yep. I got a Century C308. Now that's a fucking good rifle right there.
Yes, those are very nice guns. I've been wanting one for a while. Classic had them on sale a while back, and I don't remember why, but I didn't grab one. I was either broke or I ended up buying something else. I don't know why. Right. I'm a very opportunistic gun purchaser usually, and I've tried not to do that recently. I've tried to just buy, for about the last year, I've tried to just buy stuff that I really, really want. And it kind of started when I bought my SIG Nightmare about a year
I love those.
and a half ago. And it had been a gun I had been coveting for a very long time. First time I saw one was probably 7 years ago at a gun shop, and I couldn't afford it then. I was like, someday I'm going to have one of those, because it was about the most beautiful looking 1911 I had ever seen. Like, just, I don't know, there's something about it. Something about the two-tone black and stainless.
Yeah.
And I finally got one about a year and a half ago. And ever since then, I was like, you know what? I'm going to try to just get guns I really, really want. And so that's why the SKS, the Streebog, the SK, or the over-under shotgun. That was a impulse buy because playing too much Call of Duty.
You can't go wrong with the fucking SKS though, like legit.
No, it's probably, I think, my favorite all-around rifle. I.e., like, shit hits the fan and you need something you can hunt with and defend yourself with, and that's going to be bomb-proof. You really can't ask for a much better rifle than an SKS.
Oh, I agree. And I know my friends are just going to fucking shit on me for saying that, but I actually like it more than the AK.
I like the AK more, but again, if I was to have to pick a gun for an all-around scenario, it would be the SKS.
Oh, it's definitely.
Because
I would pick a VZ58 over an AK, to be honest.
Man, those VZ58s, man, I kick myself every day for not buying one of those way back in the day when they used to be like $350, and I never pulled the trigger on one because, well, figuratively speaking, anyway, because of the proprietary mags. Yes. But it is, in my opinion, a better spin on the AK platform. And if it took AK mags, I would have bought one a long time ago. I should have bought one anyway because now they're ridiculously priced.
Oh God, yeah, they're yeah.
But back then, that's why I never got one, was because it didn't take AK mags, and I was like, oh man. And those mags are more expensive and harder to find, and you can't just walk into any store and pick them up. You got to order them special online and all that. And so I never did it, but it's a great gun.
Well, that's actually one big reason why I got the Century C308, because G3 mags are like $8 a pop.
Yeah, they're very affordable.
It's no brainer.
Yep. Yeah.
But yeah, anyways, I love the VZ58 because when you think about it, it's a pretty interesting hybrid of a design. Because number one, it's striker fired.
Yeah.
It's got like a locking system like a Beretta 92.
Mm-hmm.
And it's milled instead of stamped, but somehow it's lighter than an AK. I don't know. It's just fucking check magic.
It's weird. They took a bunch of different designs, including from an AK and an SKS. It definitely has AK and SKS features to it and design aspects to it. But they've tweaked it in a way. I mean, it's most comparable, I think, to an AK just because of form, but function is definitely intriguing as well. It's an awesome gun. I wish I had one. I really do. But
I do too.
Again,
I do too. So I also wanted to ask. How has the ammo apocalypse affected you? Have you seen any weird ammo situations near you?
Just that there is none. That's about as weird as it gets.
You're cleaned out over there.
Yeah, all the time, everywhere. So, but as far as how it has affected me, not really. I mean, I've been stocking up on ammo for years, since before I ever had a YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And just like back in 2013, and I don't know if you remember 2013, but after Sandy Hook and then Obama started saying they were going to pass all those laws, and everybody freaked out, and you couldn't find ammo or anything anywhere. So I've been doing the same thing I did then, which is I'm fine. I've got an ass ton of ammo. It's affected me as far as like I'm, twofold. I mean, one, there's not a lot of places for me to go shoot right now because most places are closed down. And second, I'm kind of a little more hesitant to shoot because I'm like, well, I don't know how long this is going to last, but I want to keep as much ammo as possible for as long as possible. That's more of a mental thing because I do have a lot of ammo. There's like legitimately. I've only told this story a couple times, but back when I first wanted to do a YouTube channel, and I think we were. I was going to make a YouTube channel and a Twitter at the same time, and I made them both around the same time. And I can't remember which one I actually did first, but I was like, I'm gonna do this. And at first it wasn't to like make videos or anything, but just to like have. I just didn't have a YouTube channel yet because this was 2009, and YouTube had only been around since 2005.
Right.
It had only been around for 4 years at that point, and I think Twitter had been around even less than that. And so it's like I was talking to my wife. I was like, "Yeah, I want a YouTube channel so I can like save videos that I like and that kind of stuff." You can't do that without an actual, account. And I wanted to have Twitter so we can, talk to family and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, "What should I call it?" And she looks at me and she just gives me this deadpan look, like, "Are you kidding?" And she goes, "Neverenuff Ammo." And I was like, "Really?" Because I've always stocked up ammo. I just have, and she knew that. She came up with that name. That's not me. Only thing I did was I spelled enough the quote unquote internet way. Actually, it goes back before that. That's actually a comic book way, but that's the way it used to be spelled back in comic books, in the Spider-Man comic books and stuff. But the ENUFF
to do that on his album.
Yeah, exactly. So I just changed the spelling of that, but it was completely my wife came up with the name of my channel. So
I had never heard that story before.
Yeah, it was her. She's just looked at me and was like, Neverenuff Ammo. I was like, okay.
Well, you know what?
That works.
I think we have hit our hour limit here. So you know what? Thanks a lot for joining me.
No problem.
Need to do it more recently instead of over a year. In between.
Yeah. Absolutely, man. Anytime.
Yeah. I'd like to thank Matt again for lending the voice of his Neverenuff Ammo YouTube channel to my podcast here. It's always a pleasure to have him, and he is always welcome. Next up is Magnus, a Boogaloo boy, who was recently on the Jimmy Dore podcast, and he gave a wonderful speech at a Capitol somewhere, and it really caught everyone's attention. He's a very intelligent fellow with a lot to say, and he has a lot of things he wants to set straight about the reputation of the Boog Boys. Let's hear what he has to say. I'm going to start this off with, how did you get involved with the Boog Boys?
Yeah, so I kind of just always, from being on, gun websites and Reddit gun pages and stuff, the Boog memes had always kind of been around. And then, like, obviously I was in, like, Facebook groups for Boogaloo memes and stuff like that. And then for people
who may not know, what exactly is the Boogaloo?
Yeah, so it's just like the way I explain it to people is just think of it like zombie apocalypse memes. It's essentially just like a collection of memes of like, what would you do in like a societal collapse, or if like a crazy like revolutionary war kicked off, or like if the government came and tried to confiscate all your firearms and stuff like that. It's just a bunch of general memes around that idea, very collapsitarian sort of, doomsday humor. And yeah, that's pretty much what that's always been.
Okay, and you were explaining, like, how did it really form into a group, and how did you get involved? Like, what's the genesis of this whole situation?
Yeah, so in Maryland, right around the same time as the Breonna Taylor event, a man named Duncan Lemp, they put a no-knock raid on his house. Over pictures of him holding a rifle that they thought was an illegal rifle, but was just looked vaguely like an illegal rifle, and it wasn't even his. It was his friend. I forget exactly what it was, but they thought it was like a military issue, fully automatic rifle, when it was just like some kind of clone of it.
Okay.
So they no-knock raided his house. They claimed in their version of the story that they went through the front door, they entered all the way through the house, went into his bedroom, and then had an armed standoff with him. And then he reached for a rifle and they shot and killed him. Just a couple months ago, it came out that actually they broke the window out of his bedroom and then immediately shot him in his bed, and also shot his pregnant girlfriend. So that was kind of like a moment of like, hey, they literally just went like, and he was a 3%er and like a militia advocate and like a libertarian. So there's
a 3%er. So for people that don't know what that is.
Yeah, 3%er is just kind of like a generic sort of, they're to try to classify them politically would be pretty hard because they're very spread out, but more of a traditional conservative militia, I guess you would call it. And yeah, so he was, part of all those groups. So obviously in all the gun groups, we started talking of like, hey, are we going to do something about this? Like, are we going to protest? Like everyone else is protesting over, Breonna Taylor and everything else. Like there's obviously a problem here. Or how are we going to react to this? And the movement kind of like originated out of that. And we started organizing and actually putting on like protests and events and stuff like that. And it very organically kind of grew out of that.
Okay. So now I've been involved in the gun community for a pretty long time. The whole Boogaloo thing, I know how it came about, but again, a lot of my audience may not know because they're very left-leaning. I have a very left-leaning audience. And a lot of them have just found gun ownership. So can you explain exactly and precisely what the Boogaloo actually means and where it came from?
Yeah, so it came out of 4chan's K board, which is essentially just like a board about talking about guns and knives and stuff like that. And the concept like kind of always was like, what would happen if the government came and tried to like confiscate people's firearms? It was like one of most of the original memes. And it was like, well, then like the Boogaloo itself was in reference to a sequel to a bad 80s dance movie called Electric Boogaloo. So people made that joke and it kind of just stuck of like, yeah, if they try to come and confiscate firearms, it's going to like cause like a second civil war or something, so Civil War II, Electric Boogaloo. So a lot of that came out of there. And then it grew from that to kind of just mean like general collapse, whether it be through rioting or whether China invading or a meteor hitting the planet, any situation you could think of, like that would be referred to like as a Boogaloo. Right. It's very similar to like Ron Paul memes of like it's happening. People would post those a lot of like Ron Paul in front of like a nuclear bomb going off. Just kind of very similar to that. And I'm glad actually. I'm really happy to talk to you being like involved in the gun community. Of a lot of people are like, oh, this was only shared on like racist 4chan boards.
Oh,
we're like really
not.
Yeah, like anyone who's actually involved in the gun community knows that like my local gun store that is in my area has a yeet cannon, the high point joke gun.
Yeah, the YC9, yeah.
Yeah, has one of those in a box that says break glass in case of Boogaloo. That has been there since they released the yeet cannon, which was like a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. So like
I don't think it's even come out yet.
No, yeah, you can buy it. Absolutely.
I think they have like a mock-up of a Gen 1 that they just put letters on the side called yeet cannon.
Yeah, I think that's what they're selling it as. Like, I don't think they actually made the Yeet cannon. They just rebranded the Gen 1 and started selling it as the Yeet cannon. But either way, like that goes to like, this is like a normie, like old dude gun shop, and that's in there. So it's super ubiquitous throughout the entire firearms community. And just like even like 30 minutes ago, I was arguing with someone of like, oh, the Boogaloo meme has racist origins. And I'm like, if you have any experience in the gun community at all, you'd realize that it's shared by like everyone. It has no, it doesn't even really have like a political affiliation at this point. It kind of started sort of with being like an anti-gun control thing, but now people like share memes about like training Wendigos to fight cops and stuff like that. Like it has nothing to do with politics.
So, I'm speaking of, being in the gun community and all that. I like to ask my guest this question. What is the Second Amendment? What is it for? And what does it mean to you personally?
Okay, so it's kind of just sort of an extension of just natural law to me. Like even I go even further than the Second Amendment, that I wouldn't even really care if it was in the Constitution or not. Constitution at the end of the day is a piece of paper. It doesn't really guarantee anything. So I take it a step even further and say it is a very natural right to be able to protect yourself and your family and provide for yourself and your family with whatever tools and means you determine necessary.
So how would you respond to people that say nobody needs a quote-unquote military-style assault weapon with 30-round clipazines?
Oh, my God. The reverse blowback, recoilless, fully semi-automatic rifle. But yeah,
with the thing that goes up, of course.
Yeah, it's scary and black. But no, just the fact that, I mean, I could take many forms of argumentation for that. To quote a famous right-wing scholar, Karl Marx, his exact quote was something along the lines of arms and ammunitions must never be surrendered from the worker. Any attempt to do so must be met with resistance or force, something along those lines.
Yes, he did say that.
Yeah, so like it's kind of always been this principle, and it's not even like a right-wing, left-wing thing to me. And then when people ask like, oh, what practical use does it have and stuff like that, obviously there's stuff like hunting and feral hogs and everything like that, but there's also just cases that you look at, whether it be going from Trail of Tears to the MOVE bombings in Philadelphia to like situations like Waco, situations like Bundy Ranch, situations like Athens, Tennessee, which a lot of people forget about.
Yes, they do. Yeah, I know all about that.
Yeah. There's many practical instances where it might have gone better for the people involved if they had a rifle, and other instances where the fact that they had weapons were the only reason the government didn't immediately screw them over.
And I would actually, by extension, say that tyranny can exist in many forms, whether it's originating from the government or from a giant corporate entity. And
absolutely,
we have experienced this in American history, where these big businesses were oppressing people, and in some instances, they did use arms to resist that.
Yeah, I think it was Stone Mountain, the Union strikes, where they literally got into like a gunfight with the U.S. military, and then eventually, because of that, won like a lot of the foundational Union rights we have in this country was built off of a bunch of like armed hillbillies in the woods fighting Pinkertons with guns.
Right.
So it's like, I think a lot of the left forgets those roots, and I think they're deliberately left out on purpose because there's this surreal push in the Democratic Party for disarmament, and a lot of like, particularly like it always really confused me when I talk to like open Marxists and stuff like that are supporting gun control, when I'm like, you can look at any, like whether it be Lenin or Mao or like I said, Marx, they all have writing of like, don't ever give your guns up.
Right. So it's like, power grows out of a barrel of a gun.
Yeah, exactly. So it's super surreal to me, and probably like one of the best examples of sort of like how they're trying to educate people out of their rights and trying to like convince them that I don't even know how to put it, but I guess just like the conservatives like to point out the irony, and it is a very poignant irony of like defund the police but also ban all the guns.
Right.
And it's like, that's not going to work out for anybody.
Right.
Like I agree defund the police, but I also want to own an AR. So like I feel like that's more consistent,
That is absolutely 100% consistent. And I feel like, okay, you would more closely identify as some flavor or stripe of libertarian, correct?
Right. My electoral politics, so who I vote for, would be the Libertarian Party. My personal philosophy is more of just general anarchism.
Okay.
Like, it's really hard to label myself because my two people that I like most that are writers is Lysander Spooner, who was a anarcho-capitalist, and Murray Bookchin, who was a communal socialist. So it's kind of hard to put me somewhere, you know? Like, I have a really weird ideology, but
I can see how that would confuse people, but I see the underlying support for individual freedoms where you're coming from in those two mixtures of things.
Yeah, it's all the bottom of the political spectrum. And so, like, if you want to say like libertarian in the sense of like the authoritarian libertarian access, then like 100%, and that's almost my entire movement is like people on that spectrum, whether it be people that are anarcho-socialists all the way to anarcho-capitalists that you would think would be diametrically opposed, but they're both represented in this movement.
And that's why the movement has attracted me. But I wouldn't consider myself to be a boog boy, but
we'll see.
I have sympathies. I have major sympathies because when you're talking sense that can't be denied by anyone with common sense and an open mind. And speaking of that, the mainstream news media has been desperately attempting to portray you guys as some sort of white supremacist, far-right cult, violent crazies, which just is not true. So what would be your response to that accusation?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the media is going to lie and they're going to do all that. But something I kind of thought about today, and I feel like it's very poignant, is that if you go back to the early 2000s when like Anonymous and that whole movement started, Anonymous, like the Guy Fawkes masks and everything.
Yeah.
Anonymous came out of 4chan as well. They actually came from a board that was way more racist than ours. And their entire movement was so decentralized that you would have members that would go and protest for Palestinian freedom and protest for gay rights and stuff. And then you had other members that were spamming epilepsy awareness boards with strobe light images, all under the same kind of mask.
Right.
And the media at that time also desperately tried to paint them as the worst possible people in the world. They tried to paint them as destructive criminals and anarchists. Some of the people on the left wing tried to paint them as racist. Right wingers called them communists and all sorts of crazy things. And then yet now, if you go to the average BLM event, you will see a dude with a Guy Fawkes mask, and people are like super friendly and open on the left to the concept of Anonymous. And I feel like we're going through the exact same thing because we also came from 4chan. We're also very decentralized. We're very also like involved in meme culture, and we have a very widespread of political ideologies within us. And the government's trying to do the exact same thing. And I think it's just because they are terrified of the idea of decentralized movements that they can't pin down very easily, and they can't do really anything against besides attack our symbol. They could never destroy. They could never destroy the Boogaloo movement, but they can try to get it to where anyone who wears a Hawaiian shirt is a bad person. Anyone who has a penguin patch, that's another thing we do, is a bad person. And they were mostly very successful in that, on top of like banning all of us off of every social media. And then I gave that speech, and then I went on Jimmy Dore, and kind of their whole hustle has been like exposed to the world now. And I think they're very mad about it.
Your Jimmy Dore experience, what has been the aftermath of your appearance on there?
Actually, just tons of love from the left. Like, I guess I have to be specific to where like we were still, for the entire last like 6 months in this movement, we were constantly attacked by left and right. We were constantly attacked by, Rose Twitter and like all pretty much the entire political spectrum. So that still obviously is continuing, but definitely just tons of love and like curiosity from people, and actually like militant defense of me from people on the left that kind of like suddenly realize like, oh, hang on, we have this like group that's been like marginalized and attacked by the entire political and corporate establishment to the point of almost being completely destroyed. And now we see what they did, and now we see what this group is actually about, and this is kind of wrong. So there's been like a lot of defense from particularly like obviously like Jimmy Dore fans, but also like Tulsi Gabbard fans, like Bernie Sanders, like that whole wing of the left. which is, the side that I can get along with, obviously much more easier than like a Joe Biden fan or something, right, has been super embracive of us and very interested in us. And that's kind of been very hopeful, because we've gone through multiple kind of, month periods in the movement where we're like, what's the point anymore? Like, we've been beaten. There's right. definitely that feeling when you're like, I'm not even allowed to own a PayPal account anymore. I can't make a Facebook account. I can't make an Instagram. Like, I've been doxxed. Like everybody's kind of been screwed with. People have lost their jobs. So it just kind of felt like, oh, it's over with. And then this sort of J17 and that whole event kind of just fired everything back up again. So it's been great, actually. I'm top of the world about it.
So, specifically about Jimmy Dore and other people on the left that think as he does about the Second Amendment, I have made it my mission to convert Jimmy to be pro 2A. And I think it's possible.
Yes, I feel like anyone could be anyone could be kind of changed over if they actually understand firearms. That's like the consistent reality of guns. Because I don't think there's a single like common item in all of America that people know the least about than absolutely. Firearms. Like
I have said consistently that there's nothing that frustrates me more than people who say ignorant things about firearms with such supreme confidence and then go on to affect legislation based on their complete ignorance of the matter. And you don't see this, like you see with some other things, like, I don't know, global warming or whatever. You'll see people say stupid shit with no educational background, no personal experience. But when it comes to firearms, people say the most bizarre, wacky shit as if it was fact.
Yeah,
and we're just supposed to accept it.
Yeah, and you're just supposed to be like experts about it. I forget the guy. I think it was from Atlanta or something like that, where he's like, you don't need a rifle. You just use buckshot. Because I think it was on specifically on SBRs that were 9mm, and he went on this whole rant about how like you don't want people to own these rifles because they can over penetrate and hit people on the other side of the wall. But this is like a 9mm SBR, and he's talking about using like buckshot shotgun, which
right.
You could see what that does to like the average door. Like it over penetrates just as much, if not more, than a 9mm. So it's like, have you ever shot a gun before? It was so confusing. But then that same interview, he was advocating for people to buy Taurus revolvers, which was funny.
I mean, I'll defend Taurus revolvers. I'll defend them. They're pretty good.
Oh.
Not their semi-automatic handguns, although they have improved those over the years. But it's not the good old days where you would shake it and it would fire like a maraca. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I always call the Taurus semi-autos as a hand grenade with no fuse.
Correct.
It's scary.
So let's transition over into the gun talk here, because I want to pick your brain. What is your primary rifle carry right now?
Right now, I just have very standard AR, just a red dot, mostly just because I'm not hunting or anything. So I haven't really had like to kit it out or nothing. It's just been very single purpose and very much for
well, how dare you? We all know the Second Amendment is solely and exclusively about hunting.
Yeah, I know, right? How dare I? But I definitely I've been working on kitting it out. I've been 3D printing like parts for it and stuff like that. But being unemployed because of COVID, it's been kind of hard because I moved from Michigan to Chicago, and I had to get rid of like everything I had owned at that point. Which was
Are you originally from Michigan?
Yeah,
I am actually from Detroit.
Hey, I'm right now. I'm like 30 minutes from Detroit. So.
Oh, hey.
And then I moved here I lived right on 2nd Avenue and MLK.
Okay.
So like right down.
All right. Now I live in West Palm Beach, so it's interesting being in Trump territory.
Don't. You're gonna I look outside and there's 3 feet of snow. Thank you very much.
I miss the snow, man. You don't know how
really?
lucky you are.
I'm a sweet summer child. I hate the snow. That's because I got Middle Eastern, Italian, and Greek and stuff in me in high numbers. So I'm like supposed to be in sandals and a toga. I'm not supposed to be in this crap. But yeah. So I moved to Chicago and I had to sell all the weapons I had because Chicago. And I was moving into my girlfriend at the time. She lived at the dorm, so like double no firearm.
Oh Jesus, man! I can't do that, man. You're a stronger man than I am.
Well, love makes you do strange things.
Yes.
So, plus, like the desperation to get out of Detroit was just like, I'll go anywhere. Like I'd never been anywhere before that, so like I'll move. And so yeah, I lived in Chicago, and then I lived in Tennessee for a little while, and then I moved back to Michigan. And I'm like, hey, I'm back in Michigan. I can like get guns again and stuff. And that was right when like COVID and everything started happening. So very difficult to get hands on anything. So I was lucky. Yeah. I was lucky to get an AR. I was lucky to get a handgun, but like I haven't been able to go back to my super tactical, million attachment AR for cool pictures on Instagram way. It's very, very simple and basic.
Okay, so in general though, I do want to know: are you a 5.56 9mm guy, or you're more like a 308 45 guy? What are you?
I like 5.56 just because. Like just negative recoil essentially, like it, especially with like the right stock on it or something, you don't even feel like you're firing a gun. I've probably shot some pellet guns that kicked harder than a 5.56, and I just like obviously I think a lot of the caliber wars are so ridiculously specific to where like you go into the data and it's like this has like 3% more penetration power over 100 yards, and I'm like, is that really gonna matter? Like like the never ending like AKAR like debates. It's like, are they like? Does it really matter? Come on, guys. Like, is this not like
it might like barrier penetration,
right? But like enough to where like for you average normie that isn't like running the military and trying to equip thousands of soldiers. Like, is it really gonna matter? I feel like it's like Xbox versus PlayStation level of like just team sports, Because I want.
Oh, you go ahead.
Yeah, because I want to get an AK, and I'm also something very looked down upon in the gun community. I am a bullpup fan too, so.
You know what? I used to be anti-bullpup, but I've softened up, especially like handling a Tavor, an X95. I've kind of softened up a little bit.
Yeah, I just like to me it's the aesthetics of it. I don't know why. I think I was like 7 years old, and I saw FAMAS in a video game for like the first time, and I'm like, that gun looks so cool. And then I saw the Steyr AUG, and I'm like, that looks like a space gun, and I don't know, it just stuck ever since. So obviously like my mechanically I prefer like non-bullpups, and I think they're more effective. But
well, for me it was Stargate SG1 that did the P90 for me in terms of liking the bullpups.
Yeah, I was talking about the weird Keltec like P17 or I don't know what they call it, where it's like a P90 pistol or something that Keltec is making.
Yeah, that thing is weird. Yeah,
super beam gun.
Yeah, I don't think I'll be purchasing that one. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Keltec other than the Sub 2000 because that's the best thing they make.
Right, they're like just barely a step above High Point in terms of just meme guns.
Yeah,
to me.
I mean, it's just held together with like glue and fucking screws and shit. Like, no, thank you.
Right, because everyone like talks bad about like PSA ARs, but then like
there's nothing wrong with them.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with them at all. They're perfectly acceptable. And then like those same people will be like, yeah, I have this Keltec, it's awesome. And it's like, that's plastic. I think some of those guns, like guns that I have 3D printed and put together, were more stable than that.
I mean, I am a sucker for the Sub 2000, like I said, and they make the SU16, the folding 5.56. That one's pretty cool.
I don't think I've seen that one.
Yeah, it folds in half.
16 Keltec.
Yeah, it's basically piston driven like an AK, but it shoots 5.56 and it folds.
That's super interesting. Just like a little carbine almost. I like it.
And the handguards flip down and are like your bipods.
It breaks my heart though that when you Google it, the first image is a California approved version of it. It makes me really sad.
Oh god, don't even get me started on California. Ugh.
I talked to a reporter today from California, and she's like, "Is there any Boogaloo Boys in California?" And I'm like, "Not really, because like California." And she's like, "Oh, you can own guns in California," and I'm like, "Yeah,
barely.
Wow. you can own kind of guns in California." I think somebody printed somebody put on Control Pew, the 3D printing gun website. They 3D printed their Glock and they put an auto sear in it, but then they moved to California. So like the way they fixed it is I don't know how they did it, but they attached some weird contraption to the front of it that essentially made it a bolt action. He's like, it's California compliant now.
Oh, Jesus, man.
It's so bad.
Oh, man. California, the land where you are not allowed to reload your AR like a normal human being. You have to literally pop open the upper and lower receiver in order to get the magazine out.
Yeah, it's surreal. And that's the thing. Like, I guarantee that lady, because I know she's not a firearms owner because she works for the LA Times. So,
of course,
I doubt you own a gun. To where like she would probably say like, oh, I don't think California gun laws are bad. And then like I would take her to a range and be like, hey, this is a gun that you can own in Alabama. This is a gun that you can own in California. If she probably would start to see the problem here.
Well, some people still don't because they're just so deeply brainwashed, man.
Right. Yeah. There's definitely people that want just to confiscate all of it, which they just don't understand. Like obviously coming from, the Boogaloo group, like they don't understand what kind of problem any form of confiscation would bring, or that it would even work. Because a lot of people think like, oh, they'd pass, like a mandatory buyback, and it would immediately turn into a giant shooting bloodbath. To where, like, to me, like I watched, I think it was in either Maryland or Virginia a couple years back. They passed a law that required mandatory registration of all firearms in the state, all semi-automatic rifles. And they took the amount they knew were sold out of gun shops in the state. And then after like 2 months, only 4% of them had been registered.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
So like the vast majority of people, law abiding, perfectly normal, probably even like soccer moms and stuff like that, just said, oh, I'm not going to do it. And then the local police are like, oh, I'm not going to enforce it. And then this, the state legislator just kind of threw hissy fits and threatened people with arrests and everything all over the internet, and then just finally dropped it and moved on. So like, I think
this is why I'm not fond of the I lost my guns in the boating accident meme, because I don't feel like that's enough. Because once it's time to bury them, it's actually time to dig them up.
Yeah, exactly. Like oh, the whole point of owning guns, is to defend yourself. They're coming to take your guns. Quick, get rid of your guns. Like,
Yeah, that bothers me. That's always bothered me. And not only, let's say Biden pushes some bullshit through, I'm not only just not going to comply, I'm actively going to still go to the range just like I normally would, because I don't give a fuck.
Yeah, the best example of that is in Virginia. They passed an ordinance against open carrying in the state capitol. And on the 18th, of this month, local 3%ers, Boogaloo Boys, Black Panthers, like Socialist Rifle Association, like random individuals, even who else was there? There was even a trans individual flying like a trans pride flag, all just showed up with guns and just like walked right down the street, like past the Capitol building, where they were technically all committing like a violation of city ordinance.
I'm glad you brought this up, because you've actually been on the ground at a lot of these demonstrations and protests and such. What did you see with your own eyes compared to what the media was pushing on people?
Definitely that there was a lot more like possibility of violence between groups than the media kind of like puts off. They kind of point to these isolated incidents of like Proud Boys and BLM and stuff getting into fistfights and be like, oh my God, this is so horrible. To where when you like go onto the actual on the ground to these events, like there's like low level like fistfights and shoving matches and stuff like every single event. And a lot of these people have guns. And I think the other thing the media kind of, once again, going towards the whole, like their awkward relationship with guns, they ignore that the left is armed now, extremely armed, and they are not afraid to show up at events at all. And I don't even know if it's always been this way, and I just didn't know, and I didn't go and like meet up with like Socialist Rifle Association or anything, because just the media never talked about them, so I assume they didn't exist. But if you actually go on these protests, like they kind of try to sell it of like, oh, the Boogaloo Boys and the 3%ers are these crazy guys that show up with rifles to a protest, and they're the only ones that have guns there. And it's like, nope. Tons of the BLM protesters have guns. Like tons of like, anti-fascist activists have guns. They might be a little more discreet with it. A lot of them like conceal carry instead of open carry, but they have them. And then when you go to like stuff in, I think it was Georgia, they have like open arm marches of like leftist groups that walk around with rifles the same way we walk around with rifles. And I think they deliberately obfuscate that because they don't want kind of the general public to be like, oh, hey, look, it's not just like psycho right wingers that like guns, you know?
So what I also want to ask you about is, what do you think of the narrative that BLM is mostly peaceful and the people causing the troublemakers, like the troublemakers aren't a part of the protest, they're just rioters who are taking advantage of the situation? Is there accuracy to that statement, or do you feel like there's some nuance in between? Like, how do you view that? Like the violence we saw all last summer.
Yeah, I definitely think it's kind of like a factor, like three things built together, like three separate kind of things happening at the same time. One is there definitely is BLM groups, and well, maybe not even groups, but definitely people that are in the organizations themselves that have like kind of unhinged things. And even within the organizations, they call people like this like cowboys, or they cause problems. And a lot of them get disciplined by these groups that will go out and do something like violent or something like that. And then on the other angle of that, you definitely have just random people. I think this is the thing people don't understand the most, is that when you have a BLM event and you have all these protesters fighting with the cops, well, there's no cops anywhere. So like, you know, bar fight Jim that spent the last 6 years of his life going to, you know, the club and getting into fist fights and harassing women and stuff has been locked down because of coronavirus for an entire year. And he sees a bunch of people fighting cops outside, and he decides, hey, I'm going to go into Target and steal stuff. I'm going to light things on fire. I'm going to attack people. There's definitely a lot of that. And I think the conservatives kind of miss that reality. And then there's also just kind of like the broken window effect as the third thing, where the whole theory behind the broken window effect is that somebody will run up and bang on a door, and then they'll run away. And then another person will run up and maybe like try to open the door, and then like they'll run away. And then a third person might like kick the door, and it just continually like escalates in this very, you know, hive mind, like crowd mentality, this mob mentality, until eventually people that didn't have any intent to do any of this in the first place are like suddenly, you know, for example, running around the Capitol building in Washington, like confused and smoking weed and taking pictures and like, you know, in Nancy Pelosi's chair. Like there's definitely this like mob mentality. So I think if you combine those three things, also with that there is instances of, whether it be the police or outside groups or stuff like that, trying to blend in and pretend to be part of these movements to deliberately like try to provoke reactions from police or get away with crimes or stuff like that. And that's something we're actually like, they accuse our movement of trying to do, but they don't understand that the people that infiltrate try to look like left-wing protesters. Right. They don't show up in the most vibrant, colorful Hawaiian shirts ever, open carrying rifles.
Yeah, I can see how that wouldn't be effective.
Yeah, that it's so surreal when people hear that. I'm like, so if we wanted to like deliberately cause accelerationism, then why weren't we like dressing in all black and throwing pipe bombs or something from inside the crowd? Why were we dressing in the most colorful, vibrant way possible, being the most loud and open and tension grabbing thing ever, and then not committing any acts of crime or intentionally trying to de-escalate situations between the police and protesters by standing with them?
And you know, that also reminds me, let me pick your brain about what happened at the Capitol incident. Now, in my opinion, I don't think it was terrorism. I don't think they were trying to overthrow the government. I think they were dumb.
Yeah.
But also, my heart doesn't weep at the fact that politicians were scared for 20, 30 minutes. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I get exactly what you mean. And that's a sentiment we echo like throughout all of it, is like, if you ask anyone in the movement, we're like, it was dumb. It's kind of pointless. They could have done a lot more damage, both in a way that someone like me and you wouldn't agree with, or possibly in a way that we would be perfectly fine with, like stealing hard drives and leaking all of their dirty, you know, secrets onto the internet. They didn't do either of those things. But like, so we definitely all agree, like, it was dumb, it was pointless, it was counterproductive and all of that. But at the same time, like, none of us are going to cry about it, really.
And
like,
also, can you see the Biden administration capitalizing on this in order to push some sort of war on terror, but bring it home domestically?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's going to be the springboard to crack down on literally everybody. And a lot of these leftist groups do not understand. The smart ones do. The ones that talk with me, like people in the know, they understand this perfectly. A lot of just the blind sheep are just like, oh, you know, this is never going to be turned on us. It's only going to go after the evil insurrectionists. And I even talked about it on Alex Jones, when I went on Alex Jones, to where a very prominent local anti-fascist organization was censored off of Facebook for merely bringing up the possibility of working with ex-Trump supporters. They were immediately banned off of Facebook. So it was like, yeah, like this is going to turn on all of you. And I think it was yesterday, like the acting secretary of Homeland Security or something came out and openly admitted that not only were they actively researching and coming up with countermeasures for insurrectionist, far-right, white supremacist groups, it also included Antifa and BLM groups. And they tried to like sneak in like, oh, just by the way, I'm not trying to say that we're conflating these two, that they're the same amount of threats or anything. And it's like, well, if you actually feel that way, then why are you looking into them?
Precisely.
You know? So they tried to cover their tracks, but they openly admitted on live TV of like, hey, yeah, we're going after the left and the right. Anyone who opposes the government, we're going to drop the hammer on.
And that's what frustrates me about the left, the mainstream left these days, the Democrat voting left, is that all these policies they want to inflict upon their political enemies, they have no foresight to see that those policies will inevitably come back and bite them in their own fucking asses. And I don't understand that.
Yeah, it's just kind of like it's kind of just like a very basic libertarian principle of like, do not give the government power that you wouldn't want, don't give your guy in government power that you wouldn't want the other guy to have.
That's
because eventually a Republican is going to be elected, so don't pass laws that could possibly screw over Republicans if you're a Republican, and the vice versa if you're a Democrat. My go-to line is sorry, stumble over words. Is the policy you're trying to push, would you be okay if Adolf Hitler was in charge of it? If the answer is no, you probably shouldn't give the government the power to do that.
Exactly. That's just common sense to me.
Yeah, it seems super simple, but people don't get it. I just think that they have this air of benevolence and hero worship of kind of the government and their team, and they don't ever assume that like it won't all just go sideways on them.
And speaking of things going sideways, before I let you go, I got to ask you about Kyle Rittenhouse, because when I see people talk about you, they try to dismiss you because of your position on the Kyle Rittenhouse situation, but I think that situation is not black and white, and most of the people who think it is and think that he's some white supremacist running around just killing protesters didn't bother to watch all the videos that came out and actually analyze it. So why do you, because I know you have a view on the situation that is nuanced, so how do you view it, and what is your conclusion from that, and how has your opinion been received by people?
Yeah, so definitely, like, I can guarantee that most people haven't watched it, because I've been in probably 15 separate conversations where people said that the only person that was armed in that situation was Kyle Rittenhouse. There's documented photographs of the medic guy that got shot in the arm having a Glock in his hand. Like, if you don't know that, then you didn't even do basic research on it. So that's one thing. And mostly people have deliberately lied about my position explicitly. They've taken screenshots of an entire conversation that don't even say what they're trying to say and try to use that to paint my position. I have probably the most moderate stance on the Kyle Rittenhouse situation you will find or could even have, to where I just believed that in the case of bald dude attacking him, he was right to defend himself in that situation. But I don't think he should have been in Kenosha. I don't think he should have been running around. I don't think that the grown adult militia that he showed up with that left the area and left Kyle Rittenhouse alone in a riot with a rifle, a 17-year-old kid, are good people, and they should probably like have some form of punishment for doing that. Seeming they would technically kind of be his adult like wards in that situation, and they just abandoned him in there. And that I even go as far to say that the two individuals that went after Rittenhouse, the skateboard guy that was killed and the medic dude who was shot in the arm, they didn't know what was going on in the situation. All they heard was that there was an active shooter and saw a white kid with a rifle run by, and they tried to tackle it. So I go as far to even defend them and be like, they thought they were doing what was right. So, you know, that is the most moderate position you could have. And the right gets really mad at me because I won't condemn literally every person he shot as like a horrible person that deserved it. I think bald dude did, and I think there's very clear evidence of why that guy does. I mean, a lot of people gloss over the previous video of him standing in that parking lot screaming the N-word over and over and over again at everyone at that gas station. You know, that's a very convenient detail left out. I think like obviously he attacked Kyle. He kind of had what was coming to him, but I don't even condemn the other two, and the right wants me to do that really bad. And then the left wants me to just say like, oh, he had no right to be there. I agree, but he also had no right to defend himself, and he should have just surrendered his weapon to a screaming bald dude yelling the N-word that charged him in a parking lot while he was trying to run away.
And so I would also say the people who also didn't have a right to be there were the people pushing a flaming dumpster towards a gas station.
Right, and I don't even associate those people with the BLM protesters. So it's really surreal to me that like I view that group of people as like they were almost all white, and they were just like scumbags. They were just running around because the fight at the courthouse was blocks down the road. Had nothing to do with this like small group of idiots that were just running around trying to light stuff on fire. So I don't even claim them as a BLM protester. So it gets really weird.
The news is trying to say, Kyle killed some BLM protesters just in cold blood. Not true.
Yeah, these were just random dudes. Like the one guy that fired the pistol in the air behind Kyle that probably caused him to like react the way he did was just some like shady looking like white dude in a trench coat that was walking around with a handgun at a BLM protest.
Right. And there's this thing in the public consciousness where the only time it is justifiable in firing a weapon at somebody is if they too have a weapon. But a crowd of people constitutes lethal force, even if they are all unarmed.
Even in that case, the guy literally fired a handgun, like obviously not at Kyle Rittenhouse, but like up in the air behind him. So it's like, okay, dude, like I don't have this like moral worship of Rittenhouse. In fact, he is a very big, like thin blue line dude. And after his kind of behaviors of walking around bars wearing a shirt that says free as fuck, I'm like, okay, you kind of seem like a scumbag kid.
He's a fucking douchebag.
Yeah, like you're just a scumbag. But that doesn't mean that like I'm like, oh, because he's a bad person, he loses the right to like protect himself from a grown man trying to beat him to death in a parking lot. Exactly. I don't have to like him. And I go even further than that to be like, I view the situation almost exactly the same as the Ahmaud Arbery situation, to where you had like two guys run up on somebody who they assumed had committed a crime and attempted to detain and attack him and kill him. And Ahmaud Arbery happened to be unarmed and didn't live. Kyle Rittenhouse was armed and lived.
And I say this about the Ahmaud Arbery situation. As a concealed carrier, if people rolled up on me armed like that and tried to stop me, some rounds would be going down range.
Yeah,
I don't give a fuck.
Absolutely. And I got so much fire from the right on that of like, he was stalking around and they were like retired police officers and they were trying to do a citizen's arrest and blah, 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 which is all ironically enough, like the exact same arguments the left make about the Rittenhouse situation.
Yep.
And I'm like, I don't care, dude. He was just a black guy just walking through a neighborhood, regardless of whatever he did before that or after that or with a criminal record or anything. He was walking through a neighborhood and two dudes rolled up with shotguns in a car and jumped out and tried to grab him.
It's completely inappropriate in every context imaginable.
Yeah, I'd be like, screw you, dude. Like that would be two dead men if that was me in the situation. I had a firearm on me, and I totally like I said, I got so much hate from like Trump supporters and stuff on firearm groups of being like, no, this is aberrant. Like I don't take it as far as like, oh, they were trying to lynch him or anything like that, but it was two armed idiots trying to like attack a man on the street. So like, I 100% support Ahmaud Arbery in that. And I'm very glad and was very happy and, can even go back to posts I've made about it that are included in all those images. They conveniently leave out of me ecstatically sharing images of the Black Panthers walking through the neighborhood that Ahmaud Arbery was at and being like, that's awesome. See, evil white supremacist, Magnus, like being happy seeing armed Black Panther marches.
And this is the thing, because this is what complicates the whole thing for me, because I'm a black man, but I'm also on the left, but I also own guns, but I'm not a Democrat. So
you're a platypus just like me. Nobody knows
exactly. So I just get so much shit from Democrat voters, from the super far left, from the conservatives to the far right. I don't fit in anywhere. So I'm lucky that I managed to find a community where I have like-minded people, even people I don't 100% agree with all the time. But I'm just happy there's people out there that can sit down and talk to me like a normal, rational human being. And I'm just sick of the bickering and the arguing and the false accusations. Whatever happened to just discourse and grown folks talking like grown folks?
Yeah, it's totally gone. And it's just so surreal. Like a lot of the conversations I have with people where Like the particular one that always sticks with me, and I get particularly mad about it because I know exactly what they're trying to do, and I know they understand where I'm coming from, is people are like, well, if you actually believe all the things you believe, why don't you just stop calling yourself a Boogaloo and create some kind of other movement? And I'm like, one, you guys know that if I stopped calling myself a Boogaloo and started calling myself the Peace, Love, and Puppies Party, you guys would forever permanently refer to me as an ex-Boogaloo, and you might even go far enough to say that I changed my name deliberately to try to hide who I was.
Right.
And you know that no matter how much evidence I show to prove that the Boogaloo meme isn't racist, you're not going to change your opinion. So you're essentially just trying to bully me into a lose-lose situation. Like, it doesn't matter if we associate with a different movement or change our name, you're not going to accept it. And it doesn't matter if I keep it, you're not going to accept it. So what's the point of even engaging with you?
Correct. 100%. So with that, I'll just open up the space for you. What kind of message do you want to send to the public about your positions and the position of your group and what you really truly stand for, and possibly any plans, if you have any, for the future?
Yeah. So yeah, just our whole general movement, anyone's welcome. It has just, 3 really simple, easy rules. Don't be a bigot or a sexist or any form of, the traditional you would see on any website rules of, don't be this kind of asshole. You have to be willing to be armed, and you have to be willing to go out and do something about it. That's kind of the big difference between us and like 3%er orgs and stuff like that. We don't tolerate inaction. We don't, we're not going to just sit at home. If you want to be part of this movement, we have to do things about it. And we're definitely currently just trying to keep the momentum that we've seen over the summer and everything of kind of like this anti-authority belief and keep it running instead. Because usually when a Democrat gets elected, you see left-wing activism kind of just disappear for 4 years.
Yep.
We're trying to prevent that from happening. And one of the things we are doing is we are organizing in Atlanta, in Georgia, on the 22nd, I think. I'll have to double check. I posted about it. We're organizing a protest at an ICE detainment camp where there was recently whistleblowers that were saying they were doing involuntary hysterectomies on migrant women. So we're putting on that.
Like a good cause.
Yeah, that's kind of something you think everyone would be opposed to, regardless of their beliefs on immigration or ICE or anything. That in particular is a problem. We should probably do something about that. But we're putting on that event there, and we plan on just kind of doing a lot more stuff like that and keeping the ball rolling. Obviously, there's unfortunately probably going to have to be pro-Second Amendment protests in the near future with what's coming down the pipeline from Joe Biden, and we're going to actively work on getting kind of the whole Second Amendment community on the same page for like, hey, let's all show up. Like, let's have the Socialist Rifle Association and the Black Panthers and the 3%ers and the Oath Keepers and the Boogaloo Boys and like everyone and anyone in between. Let's all do this together. Let's oppose this together.
Well, I can say for sure I have 15,000 members and growing on R2A Liberals, and we are 100% fired up and ready to go because we know we do have a fight coming. Whatever form that fight takes, we're ready to take it on. But thank you for joining me today. It was a pleasure to talk to you, man.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. I'm just some guy, nothing special. So thank you for letting me talk.
No problem. We got to get the truth out there, man.
Right.
All right, man. Thanks.
Thanks. You have a good one.
Next up and last, but most certainly not least, is Top Shot Champion Chris Cheng. It was very nice of him to agree to come on the show. I had a blast talking to him. He's a legit dude, and we talked about everything from anti-Asian hate to being gay in the gun community. I hope you enjoy. So, yeah, thanks for doing this. I was actually pleasantly shocked that you agreed to.
My pleasure for chatting with you and your listeners today. I'm excited to just hang out, and we'll talk about guns and everything else.
All right, that sounds like a plan. So let's get started way at the beginning. Where are you from? How did you get into guns? And let's just start there.
Sure thing. Yeah. So I grew up in Orange County in Southern California, and my father is the one who introduced me to firearms at the age of 6. And, even though I started shooting early in life, it was not something that we did frequently. So we would only go to the range maybe once every 3 to 4 years. and we would go to this range called On Target in Laguna Niguel, and just like spend an hour or two, punch some holes in paper, and then the guns went back in the safe. And I wouldn't see them, for 3 to 4 years at a time. So, it wasn't really until Top Shot started airing on the History Channel where not only did I at that point own my first gun, but watching Top Shot made me inspired me to purchase additional guns, and then I was definitely going to the range a lot more frequently, something on the order of like maybe once a month. So still not super frequently, and I was I'm a self-taught amateur shooter, and even when I started competing in my local range, I wasn't like winning trophies or placing in the top 3 or anything like that. And USPSA or IDPA matches that I was shooting in is all just very much literally fun and games, for me. But of course that all changed once I auditioned for and got a slot in season 4.
So before you went on season 4, you had no formal training of any kind?
No, everything that I had learned about firearms was either from my father, which was the basics around safety and general marksmanship. And then when I had applied for Top Shot, I had maybe a year of local match experience, but like all my quote unquote training was just what I was learning at the range, watching YouTube videos, reading blogs, and but yeah, it was all very self-taught and very, very casual, informal self-training.
So what made you have the gall to say, you know what, look at those Top Shot people, I bet I can do that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I used to watch Top Shot every week with some colleagues at Google, where I used to work. And so, the 3 of us, we would watch Top Shot every week. And I think like a lot of us who watch your favorite game shows, you'll sit there on like, watching Price is Right or Wheel of Fortune, and you're like, oh, I know the answer to that question. Oh, right. I could win that game on Price is Right. And for some reason, when I was watching earlier seasons of Top Shot on TV, on the couch, like, millions of viewers did every week, I was sitting there watching all these professional, shooters shooting these Top Shot challenges. And I was just fantasizing, seeing myself in those challenges and being like, oh, I could hit those targets, and oh, that looks like a lot of fun. I think I could do that too. But I had no real business thinking that I could actually do any of that because I had 0 accolades or credentials to my name. But that's part of that's sort of what I was thinking at the time is, hey, I think I could do it.
So how did that translate into reality? Like, what was that experience like actually being on Top Shot? And did it match your preconceptions about the difficulty level?
Yeah, so, in order to bridge this tremendous skills gap that existed between when I applied and then, when I actually went on Top Shot season 4 to compete, I had about 5 months of training, and it was all self-taught training even still, but I had treated training like a part-time job, and I was spending about 20 to 25 hours a week doing some kind of firearms training, whether it was live fire or, to be frank, most of my training was dry fire exercises, at home. Yeah, right. It's sort of this. It's not a secret, right? It's sort of most professional shooters, spend a lot of our time dry firing because it is kind of the ultimate convenient approach, right, to practicing, your shooting skills. Unless you have a range, in your backyard that you can just go and, shoot, good for you. For most people, I live in San Francisco, so unfortunately, I can't just go outside and, shoot guns in the middle of, of a major city. So, dry firing was a real key, technique and training tool for me. as was YouTube and a lot of blogs and the Cal Guns discussion forum, and just hearing a lot of tips and tricks from people on kind of marksmanship best practices. I think the last thing I would say on this point is I really just focused on the core fundamentals of marksmanship. I wanted to avoid this trap of thinking that I needed to go shoot every single make and model of pistol, rifle, and shotgun, because one, that was just unfeasible.
Right.
That was just like a losing strategy. And also the reality was I didn't have a lot of gun friends. I didn't have a lot of access to particular firearms. So it was just sort of, well, that really wasn't even a feasible option, even if I, set myself down that path. So, really focusing on the core fundamentals of marksmanship and going under this assumption that no matter what kind of weapon was put in my hands, that as long as I had a strong command and control of the marksmanship principles, that I should theoretically be able to use any weapon. And so to the second part of your question, Mara, how did this translate to actually being on Top Shot? And this point that I just made was pretty much critical, I think, to my success, which is I really was platform and make and model agnostic when it came to whatever weapons came up on and then challenges, where I had competitors who were so locked into a particular firearm that their duty weapon was maybe the Beretta M1 what's M9, right, the Beretta M9, or they're a law enforcement officer who trains on the Glock 22, and it's like, oh well, if and so I heard this so frequently from my competitors, where they would say, oh, well, I didn't do well in whatever challenge, but if it had been a Glock 22, which is a gun that I know really well, right, I would have crushed it. It's like, well, I'm sure you would have done better, but that's just not the name of the game with Top Shot. It is literally about shooting weapons that you are probably unfamiliar with, right? And even if you are, let's take, for example, I'm a Glock 34 shooter.
Okay.
But if you throw someone else's Glock 34 in my hands, that's very different than my Glock 34 that I have set up in a very particular way. But Top Shot's all about that flexibility, the agility, the ability to adapt to whatever unfamiliar circumstance may be thrown in your lap in these crazy Top Shot challenges. So yeah, my training approach was critical in helping me succeed on the show and ultimately win Top Shot season 4.
Well, I'm actually glad to hear you say that, because I preach all the time, learn the fundamentals. It doesn't matter what weapon gets put in your hand. You have to know how the trigger works, generally speaking. You have to know how sights work, generally speaking. And you can shoot anything. You just can't get locked into one singular platform, unless, of course, you're relying on that weapon every single day to save your life, potentially. But I'm really glad to hear you say that. I've been saying this for years. So let's...
Yeah, and
I want to talk about...
What other... Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. I want to talk about your experience on Top Shot. Was the camera being there bothersome to your performance? Did it distract you, or do you have a way of getting in the zone? What was that like?
Yeah, the production crew did a really great job of making the cameras disappear while we were competing.
Okay.
So thankfully, the cameras were not distracting. However, what was distracting is the host, Colby Donaldson, who was narrating literally every single thing that's happening. And of course, that's the job of a good host, right? Is to explain to the viewers what's happening. But as a competitor, for example, there were times where I fell behind in a challenge, right? And the pressure was on, so my stress levels were just redlining. And the last thing I need is to hear Colby say, Chris is struggling, Chris is behind. And I mean, in my mind, I'm saying to myself, damn it, I already know that. I don't need to hear you saying it out loud and like adding more pressure to this competition. But that's also part of the game, right? Is you've just got to work through, right, the sort of the so while the cameras weren't a distraction, we were definitely aware of the crew and the large support staff that was watching us compete during all of the challenges. And for me, I've had enough experience. I guess like the close, maybe the most relatable analogy I could provide is anybody who's played sports before knows what it's like. I was a baseball player, and when you're up to bat, you just can't let the audience or other things in the field distract you, and that's very hard. But it's sort of the same mentality, right? That if you're playing right, whatever sport, you just have to zone everything else out except for what really matters, and whether that's right, the ball or whatever, kind of whatever, you need to focus on just what needs to be done to win and to succeed. So that was a very, very fun experience, right? There's just not many times in your life where you get to compete and have your whole performance, filmed by a top-notch film and audio crew, and right, put together these amazing episodes that will live on in perpetuity. So it was a really, really fun experience.
So one more thing about Top Shot, I've been wondering for a while. What was the easiest stage for you, and then on the inverse, what was the most difficult stage?
Yeah, I think the easiest challenge for me was there was a crossbow challenge, and it was with oh man, well, I'm trying to remember the make of the crossbow, but anyway, I was on I was on the red team, and we had to shoot moving targets in a circular pattern, and I had 5 targets that I had to shoot for my particular round. And in my mind, I was thinking 5 targets, 5 shots. I want to go just perfect, 5 for 5. And I did it. And so much of that whole experience was being very intentional and actually being slow, ironically, right? Being slow about, loading the crossbow, bringing it up to target, and shooting moving targets is pretty challenging, especially with the crossbow, which I think it's throwing bolts at like 350 feet per second, which is quite slow, right? Especially compared to a bullet. So, when you're shooting bolts, you have to take into account that there's going to be a delay. So you either need to lead the target. Anyway, point is, I mean, that was, it was just sort of easy for me because I just set a very simple goal of 5 targets, 5 shots, and I just did it. Now, one of the hardest challenges was actually one of the first team challenges, which was a similar situation where I had 6 steel plates to knock down, and we were shooting a Ruger Vaquero, which is a 6-shot revolver.
Right.
And so very similarly, I'm like, okay, right, I have 6 plates, 6 shots, and actually you had every competitor on each team had to have a perfect run on their row of 6 steel plates. And, I thought, okay, right, like this should be very straightforward. But for the life of me, the Ruger Vaquero, it's a cowboy gun. It's got this pistol grip, this cowboy grip that is very small. It doesn't fit very well in my hand. And so every time I was squeezing the trigger, the whole grip was slipping in my hand, and I was dropping so many of my shots. And it was incredibly frustrating to have, so many misses. It was one of the most frustrating and like dramatic shootouts of the season because it ended up being me going head to head with another competitor who's also just struggling to hit a perfect run. But thankfully, like I was able to pull myself together and won it for my team. But I really struggled with that Ruger Vaquero, and to this day, it is not a gun that I like, but I do own a matching set, and so one of these days I'm gonna like practice really, really hard with those revolvers and get really good with them.
Yeah, see, that's the mark of a true gun owner, owning guns you don't even like.
Exactly.
So let's move away from Top Shot and let's delve more into the realm of the political here, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So you are a gay man, and you definitely make that known. Do you think that's provided any barriers for you in the gun world, or do you think it hasn't been an issue for you at all?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's been funny. When I won Top Shot, I won $100,000, and it was just a great opportunity for me to quit my job at Google and just start a brand new career in the firearms industry. And so in tech, I was already out, and when I joined the firearms industry, while I was here's actually one more quick thing about Top Shot. I was cast as a gay, self-taught amateur IT geek, and the shocking thing is they never outed me on the show.
Correct.
And so I was really surprised that when the finale of my season came and went, I was like, well, they never outed me. And so when I joined the firearms industry, I was like, well, holy crap. Like I have to basically come out all over again in this new industry. Wow. And anybody who is gay and who's come out knows it's like, okay, like, I don't know, if you've done it once, you sort of get the hang of it, kind of thing. But it is still always kind of fraught with anxiety, with these lingering questions of, what are the firearms industry executives going to think about me? And what about, my other competitive shooters? And is this going to open up opportunities, or is it going to close doors? And, am I maybe going to be sabotaging myself, by coming out? But, the way that I live my life has always been one where I want to live my life as my true authentic self.
Yes.
Right. As much as I can in as many places. And I don't want to betray my personal ethics or morals or values. And so, yeah, coming out was a very logical thing for me to do. And it was kind of one of those consequences be damned kind of thing where I said to myself, okay, if coming out in the firearms industry is a career-ending move, well, I can always go back to tech, right? Tech was not going to be going anywhere. So that was sort of like my fallback plan. But thankfully, the firearms industry and the gun owning community was incredibly receptive to me, coming out. And, since then, this was back in 2012, for me, because I hadn't really been, I did not consider myself a part of the gun community before Top Shot. Yes, I owned a gun, but in my mind, it was very much like, I own a gun for home defense and for the occasional like fun plinking, outing with friends. But I didn't have a lot of gun friends, and but that all changed. And so as I started diving into gun culture and meeting more gun owners, and I realized and learned that the Second Amendment community is already diverse, right?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Clearly like not the only gay gun owner out there. Clearly, even here. In this great 2A liberals Discord group, literally have, I would assume, right, there's probably some LGBT gun owners, or right, and then of course then you have a lot of straight allies, right, who support the gay community, and so I've been pleasantly surprised, around the amount of support and words of encouragement that I've received. over the past, 10 some years that, I've been kind of, knee deep in firearms advocacy. And for me, the convergence of me being gay and being a gun owner has been very, not only eye-opening for me, but also feels personally fulfilling, where, whether it's gun rights or gay rights, it's all the same fight for civil rights and for personal freedom and liberty and responsibility. And that's a personal and political and philosophical mindset that has, it's matured for me personally, right, over the past decade. And I'm just very thankful that, my personal and professional lives have, brought me to this point in my career where I'm, really satisfied, and I get a lot of enjoyment, right, out of advocating for our freedom and for our rights. And when it comes to, the Asian, I'm also, a big advocate for getting more Asians into the Second Amendment and the gun community. And a big personal challenge for me has just been leading by example and speaking up, and particularly encouraging, more Asians to go try out, shooting, right? Go purchase your first gun and go get some training. And so that's been another fun, personal part of my experience.
And that's a big thing for me, because my significant other, she is an Asian woman. She's an Asian immigrant from Thailand, and she's not super into guns to the same way that I am, but she understands the Second Amendment. She understands the utility in owning firearms and training in their use. And I'm probably single-handedly responsible for arming the majority of the South Florida Thai population. So I'm pretty proud about that.
Awesome.
So
amazing.
So what I want to ask you, because your race is relevant because of what's happening in the news recently with all these attacks against Asian people. And plus, you live in California where you hear a lot of these things happening. Have you personally seen or experienced any of this discrimination?
Yeah, thankfully, I've not personally seen it, but living in San Francisco, where so much of the anti-Asian American violence is happening, it's just been heartbreaking. And, San Francisco, I've lived in San Francisco for 14 years, and it's just gotten so bad in general over the past probably 6 years. Law and order in general has just been deteriorating, and the quality of life it just gets worse and worse and worse, where our politicians, they just let street people do whatever they want to do on the streets. And that ranges from, creating encampments and blocking sidewalks, littering, doing drugs openly, in the street, and urinating and defecating. I've had human feces on my driveway 3 times, over the past, 3 years since I've lived in my current place, and, 2 times in my previous, residence. And so it's just, and then you layer COVID and sheltering in place on top of this anti-Asian American, racist rhetoric. Plus, it's not just rhetoric; it's also physical attacks. And it's just been such a frightening place. And, it's one thing, what disgusts me the most is this: hey, it's one thing if somebody wants to come attack me because I'm 41 years old. At least I'm like able-bodied, and I can at least stand a chance, right? Like defending myself. But what's been particularly vile and disgusting about a notable number of these attacks, and not just in San Francisco, but in New York and a few other cities here in the U.S., is the attacks are going after the elderly.
Yes.
And man, it's sort of like, if you go after the elderly or children like that, that is just the most disgusting of, demographic of any society.
Yes, the lowest of the low.
Yeah, man. And, seeing elderly Asian Americans get attacked and many of them dying from their injuries has been heartbreaking. But then to add insult to injury, you've got the San Francisco District Attorney, Chesa Boudin, who is a key contributor to the increased violence and crime that we've been seeing in San Francisco since he got elected. He is saying things like the criminal who punched this 84-year-old Thai American to the ground and then he died of his injuries, that he's saying that the criminal just had a, quote, temper tantrum.
Oh, yes. I heard that.
And, I hear, him, and we have the Oakland chief of police who said he doesn't want citizens to arm or defend themselves. Yes. He just wants us to be, quote, good witnesses. Ugh. And you start putting these pieces together and it's like, wow, okay, so if we can't, if we're being encouraged to not defend ourselves and to just take it on the chin and risk being killed, and if we are killed, that justice won't be served on the other end, right, with criminals being arrested and prosecuted, and the whole system is failing, right? It's just so frightening. It's a frightening time to be living in San Francisco, and I have extended family in the city who live with me who are in their 70s, who are in their 80s. They're literally in this target population of elderly Asians.
Yes.
Who, I'm just like frightened to think, okay, like they can't even just go to the grocery store without having to worry about being attacked. And if they are attacked, like it's game over. Like my 80-year-old great aunts, like they can't use pepper spray, they can't use a taser, they can barely use a whistle. Like there's just like they could probably barely like scream for help. Like they're just old. And I hate to use the term helpless, but like that's just the reality of their age and their mindset. Like they just wouldn't be able to run away or to defend themselves. And so it's like, wow, like where does that leave me and my family in terms of trying to make sure that they're safe? And there's just, as we all know, there's just never any guarantee that you're going to be safe, if you're out in public. But that's just the frightening reality that I'm dealing with right now.
And speaking of reality, this is probably going to be a little spicy for some people, but I'm a black man, and I fully recognize a large number of these attacks are committed by a lot of black men, young black men. And there's this narrative going around in the mainstream Democrat kind of consciousness here that it's motivated by white supremacy somehow. That pisses me off. How does that make you feel?
Yeah, I've been hearing a lot of the same white supremacy comments, and I don't buy it. So I think it's a lazy way of processing the violence if you just immediately jump to white supremacy. Like it's, or honestly, if you just jump to any conclusion without there being proof, that's just being lazy. So
yes.
So here's an example. Like here's sort of where I'm concerned that some of the anti-Asian American conversation attacks and the conversations are going. So, I'm following some Instagram feeds where they're covering attacks against Asian Americans, but some of these attacks are not clearly racially motivated. There's sort of been, in some of these attacks, there's been no clear indication that it's racially motivated, and it looks like it's a sort of a crime of opportunity kind of thing. So, just because an Asian person gets attacked doesn't immediately mean that it's a hate crime. Right. It's like we need the proof that it's a hate, and I know that can be hard to determine unless they're explicitly, screaming anti-Asian epithets, or, go back to your country, or
which has
China
happened.
virus or whatever kind of anti-Asian lingo. But so that's sort of one thing, and then on the your other point, about, the race of who's committing these attacks. And sure, right, like a notable number, and I don't have the numbers, but I've seen that a notable number of them, of these crimes have been committed by African Americans. And part of me is, I guess I'm of two minds. The first point is, with respect to who is committing the crimes, I just kind of don't care what the race is. I just want the crimes to stop.
I agree. But the reason I bring up race is because my significant other, she works in a Thai restaurant, and every single day she has dozens and dozens of stories is just being racially disrespected, and it's primarily black people doing it to her. And I've seen it with my own eyes. And I do firmly believe there is an anti-Asian sentiment that's been sort of festering within the black community, and not universally, maybe geographically in some ways, but I have seen it, I've heard it myself, and I just can't deny at this point that it exists. Now, I understand there's some historical context and things like that, but I think people need to start speaking out, especially people that are inside of the community.
Absolutely. And, so to your point, right, like, so the other mind, right, that I said, right, I'm of one mind that I don't care, like, what race is, right, committing the crimes. I just want it to stop. However, I am of another mind where race matters, I think, is important for us to understand if there are particular reasons why blacks are attacking Asians, then we need to unpack that.
Yes.
Right? And if there's an opportunity for these two communities to come together and resolve whatever animosity may exist, right, then we should leverage that. So, I think I've been encouraged to see a lot of Asian Americans, bonding around, the whole kind of like Black Lives Matter concept. And
right.
I've seen some like joint kind of slogans where it's sort of like it's sort of like Asians for Black Lives, or something like some like kind of combination of basically saying, the black community supports the Asian community and vice versa.
Yes.
And that's been very encouraging to see. And frankly, right, in terms of like understanding where this historical animosity comes from, I have not studied or learned enough at this point to really be able to dig deep. However, I will say, if we go back to 1992 and the LA riots, so there's sort of two layers to what I'm about to say. The first one is, I grew up in Southern California during the 92 riots, and what was happening in LA was about 50 minutes from my parents' house. I was 12 years old at the time, and I remember seeing the LA riots on TV, and it just felt like, okay, like it's an hour away, which is far away enough, right, that we're not worried that the LA riots are going to come down to Orange County, where I lived at the time.
Right.
But then after winning Top Shot, I learned about the whole rooftop Korean meme and the whole rooftop Korean experience of, Koreatown was under attack, from the riots, and LAPD, couldn't be there. So the Korean American community used their Second Amendment rights and their own personal firearms to defend Koreatown. So I was like layer one, like, oh, wow, okay, Asian Americans have this very clear moment in U.S. history where we exercise our Second Amendment rights because the LAPD, the government, couldn't be there to protect us. Mm-hmm. Now, the next layer that I learned years later, this was maybe in 2016, is that the attack on Koreatown allegedly was this sort of powder keg situation where months or like a year prior to the riots, there was a Korean storekeeper who shot, I think it was a 15-year-old black girl who allegedly was stealing something, whatever. But right, this Korean, American shop owner shot and killed this 15-year-old black girl. And that was like a huge negative flashpoint, right, between the Asian and Black communities in LA, and the riots then were just, okay, the Blacks wanted to come and sort of, let out a lot of anger and vengeance. So that was an eye opener, just because I just never personally experienced any kind of cultural hate from the Black community, or really, it never felt like an organized thing for me. Like, I've had my fair share of like racist comments and experiences, but it always, right, it's like, and I guess like I always felt like they were very like isolated to that individual who was either, making fun of me or saying whatever stupid racist thing. But as we all get older, I think why we realize, okay, well, that one person who's saying or doing these racist things, they're being influenced likely by some larger force, whether it's like their family, their community, whether it's by race, by your religion, or whatever, kind of community unit, that might be out there. And so, yeah, I mean, I think at a high level, the violence is something that is solved when people and communities work together to resolve it.
Absolutely. I think more conversations like the ones we're having now need to be taking place, because that's the only way it's going to fix the situation. We need to come together.
Exactly.
We can't go apart. Because
yeah,
I know you're cool with Maj Toure, right? Of Black Guns Matter.
Oh, absolutely. And I was, I recently testified in the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee, where they're starting a series of hearings on gun control bills that are going through the Senate right now. And Maj and I were friends, and on a moment's notice. So I found out I was going to testify on Friday. I find out I'm going to testify, and Tuesday is the actual hearing. So I had 3 days to basically, prep and write, and also fly from California to DC on very short notice. Mm-hmm. But, I contacted Maj, and I said, hey, he's on the East Coast. I'm like, hey, if you're free on Tuesday, I would love to invite you, as my guest to come, support me with my testimony. And yeah, like no questions asked. Like he was there and showed up and helped me with my testimony as well. And so yeah, I mean, it's Maj and I, we're friends. We're also colleagues, and are definitely doing as much good work together as we can to foster not just, I think for us, I mean, the unifying pieces, right? The Second Amendment and personal freedoms and liberties. Yes. And I guess it's almost like, and we happen to be Black and Asian, right? Yes. kind of thing. But yeah, I don't want to discount, that race can matter. It doesn't always matter, but it can matter. And when it does, we should acknowledge it and right, make sure that we're trying to use race as a positive thing versus something that divides us or that drives us any further apart.
I couldn't have said that any better. That's exactly how I feel about the matter. And I just think the only way we're going to do that is just being honest with each other. We can't dance around the issue, like we tend to do in the public discourse. So I want to move on to gun control in general. I mean, I'm sure you remember the 1994 assault weapons ban, correct?
Mm-hmm.
At the time, were you old enough to really appreciate how full of shit it was, or were you not really aware of that at the time?
Oh, I had zero awareness. So in 1994, I was only 14 years old. And, even when the assault weapons ban expired in 2004, that put me at 24. But, like I was mentioning earlier, I wasn't really a gun guy. Right. I didn't purchase my first AR until I was 29. Yeah, so it's because it's 2009. And in California, we still have we had a state basically a state assault weapons ban for all intents and purposes,
and
right?
roster and all that
So you
stuff.
have to buy a neutered AR with this bullet button, and now it's like gotten even more restrictive. You know, at the time when I bought my first AR here in California, you know, when you just sort of experience restrictions, but you don't know any better, right? Like I just didn't. That was my first, you know, AR, and I just didn't know many other people who owned AR-15s, and so I just thought, oh well, okay, whatever. This bullet button thing, it's kind of silly, but whatever. I'll just like deal with it, and oh, you know, I have to, you know, put my name on basically on a watch list. You know, the California Department of Justice keeps record of every single firearms purchase in the state. And I didn't think that was a big deal at the time, but the more you learn, especially the more you learn about, right, how you people in Florida and like residents in Texas and other states, right, there are no restrictions like this.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking to myself, you know, how are these restrictions actually keeping anybody safer? And it just didn't add up. And I think that's the challenge that we face when we have this public discourse around an assault weapons ban, and how futile it is to try and restrict a particular type of firearm when, you know, the AR platform, it's sure there are some like distinct characteristics of the platform. I mean, mostly it's modularity and, right, the Picatinny rail, and like, oh, you just can get like a bajillion accessories, right, to put on your AR. But functionally, there are plenty of other rifles that can essentially fire, right, just as quickly, you know, right, as the AR platform, and they can hold, right, they can accept 30 round standard capacity magazines, and, you know, right, we can obviously go on and on and on. But I remember a key inflection point for me with the assault weapons debate was Sandy Hook.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
You know, to bring us back in time. So Sandy Hook, right, this terrible, horrific shooting of children, right? And back to, right, like just the scum, the low of the low, like the most scummiest of scum, like going after innocent children and just gunning them down was one of the most nauseating, disgusting things that I think we've ever seen in our country.
Yes.
And that was December 14th, 2012. And the reason why I remember that date in particular is because it's my birthday.
Oh, man.
And it's also the year that I won Top Shot. So, you know, I had about 6 months post Top Shot win of just, you know, thinking, oh, wow, like this is so fun. You know, I'm going to have my 5 seconds of fame, and then, you know, whatever, I'll just go shoot guns, you know, for Bass Pro Shops, and, oh, you know, right, life will be dandy. But after the Sandy Hook shooting, obviously the whole national conversation just turned for the worse, right? And just, it's been a very dark time, and talking through, you know, how's our country gonna work our way through, you know, all this violence that we're seeing. But I remember particularly when I heard that an AR-15, where it was used in the Sandy Hook shooting, I was like, oh my God, I know exactly what's gonna happen right now, is that the government is literally gonna come after my AR-15. And no surprise, right? That's what happened, and that's what's been happening, right, over the past, you know, 9 years. And Joe Biden is about to announce some executive actions tomorrow, and I wouldn't be surprised if there's some executive order targeting assault weapons. And I just remember thinking, well, my AR-15 and my guns have literally nothing to do with the violence that's happening by these criminals who are using, right, AR-15s. And from a logical perspective, if we look at the percentage of crimes that are committed in our country with an AR-15, the number of shootings and the number of people that die as a result of an AR-15 being used in the commission of a crime, it's like less than 1%, right? It's a percent of 1%. It's a small percent of 1%, but clearly when an AR-15 gets used in a mass shooting, it scares the shit out of people. And I understand that, right? Like that's the part I do understand how bad the optics look. And then there's this natural inclination of, oh, right, scary black gun, AR-15s are terrible. We need to ban them. We need to restrict them. But just the numbers don't pan out, right? And then it's also the media sensationalizing mass shootings, and especially if it's with an assault weapon. And right, the disingenuous part of the way that the media covers firearms violence in our country is the vast majority of the 10 to 12,000 firearms homicides that occur every year are not mass shootings, right? It's other types of shootings. Some of them are gang violence, some of them are domestic violence. But it's definitely not mass shootings, right? It's if politicians and if our country really wanted to do something about reducing firearms violence, right? It's about focusing on the where are the largest numbers of people dying, and it's not in mass shootings. So, I think
2/3 of gun deaths are suicides. So why aren't we focusing on that?
Exactly, and thankfully, I can say that the firearms industry is definitely doing something about it, and I've also been very personally involved in addressing suicide prevention with the NSSF, and we have a new. When I say we, I'm not a part of the. I'm an NSSF member, but I don't work for the NSSF. But the NSSF is a partnership with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, and it's a partnership that I was a part of helping set up through a number of kind of like back channel meetings that I had with AFSP over the course of a year, and it was really about building trust. And back to what we were talking about earlier about building trust between the Black and Asian communities. And in this case, it's about bridging the firearms industry with the suicide prevention community. Those kind of connections only happen when you have people willing to reach out, right, across the line, if you will, right, or across different communities, different perspectives, and try and find out where do we have potential areas of collaboration and agreement. And SSF and AFSP, what was really interesting to me is, so, basically I was having these parallel conversations with NSSF leadership and AFSP leadership. And what I heard from the firearms industry was that the manufacturers and gun ranges and a lot of gun owners themselves did not want to talk about suicide because it was just such an uncomfortable topic.
Right.
And it was sort of, the firearms industry was also saying to themselves, well, we're not suicide prevention specialists. So if we were to talk about suicide prevention, like how do we even talk about it with any kind of authority or knowledge of like what are the techniques that help reduce suicides? Like the firearms industry, right, didn't really know. And then on the flip side, with the suicide prevention industry, they knew very much, right, that firearms were a key tool used in suicides, but they were saying, well, the gun industry probably has no interest in talking about this negative subject, right? Which is like suicide is like such a dark, taboo topic. And, they just assumed, hey, the gun industry wouldn't want to talk about it with clinical professionals therapists, the medical community that's working on suicide prevention. But once I heard each side say, oh, they just sort of assumed, either that the other side like wouldn't want to talk, or that there wouldn't be any collaboration opportunities. I just said, I'm like, I just don't think that doesn't seem true to me. And so, I introduced, some key players on each side, and here we are, 6 years later, where the industry, the firearms industry and the suicide prevention communities have been working hand in hand. And, we have this initiative called Project 2025, which is about reducing the suicide rate with a firearm by, I think it's by 50% by the year 2025. And so, it's a joint collaboration where the AFSP is bringing their suicide prevention knowledge into the firearms community, right? And then, of course, the NSSF is bringing their leverage and connections with gun store owners, gun ranges, firearms manufacturers, and obviously Second Amendment influencers around talking about suicide prevention and trying to normalize, right, this conversation about mental health. And if you have any kind of ideations of suicide, that it's okay to talk to somebody about it, right? And
Absolutely.
We obviously want to make sure that we have appropriate guardrails so that people aren't losing their Second Amendment rights if they're having a temporary mental health crisis. So that's where the red flag laws and executive, or also known as extreme risk protection orders, and 5150s, right? There's just all these tools out there that can put your Second Amendment rights at risk. So we need to balance, right? How do we get people the mental health resources that they need without fear, right, that they're going to lose their Second Amendment rights?
And that's actually something that is important to touch on. Is as gun owners, we are often accused of not caring about suicides, not caring about mass shootings, not caring about mental health, but that's absolutely not true. There's so many efforts going on right now to address these things within the community, and if you're not in the community, you're not exposed to that. So I think it's very important, the work that is being done, like you mentioned, and it's just very irritating whenever a mass shooting or anything tragic happens with the firearm, all the accusations that get thrown our way, especially by the mainstream media. You know how that song and dance routine goes. So I want to know, how do you recommend having a conversation with somebody that is not already in the gun community? And is it even really possible?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my advice is you need to first understand where the person you're talking to is with respect to firearms. So, and I think to put it most simply, are they anti-gun, or are they neutral, or sort of somewhere, in between? And, if you're talking to someone who is already anti-gun, and if they're not open to having their preconceived notions challenged, then I think, that's just going to be a less fruitful conversation, right? Than if you're talking to somebody who's open to irrational, logical discussion.
Right.
And then, you kind of have to go down this path of, am I going to have a stronger argument if I use data and facts and figures, or if I just use straight logic, or use an emotional argument, and maybe you have your own personal story, right, around like why you own a firearm, or right when you've been either threatened or attacked, right? So I think making it personal. I think one weakness that the gun community has in the debate is we typically stay away from our emotional arguments around why we believe the Second Amendment is important, but the other side basically leverages the violence, right? Yes. As part of it's the fear of. I mean, when we get down to brass tacks, the fear part from most anti-gunners is, I don't want to get killed, and I don't want to see, you know, my family or anybody that I know get killed. But I think where it really comes down to is where it's like, they don't want themselves, right, to get shot. I mean, then clearly, like, that's irrational. Like, none of us do, right?
Right.
But it's that fear that they're able to leverage very effectively in convincing politicians and the general public, right, that gun control is somehow, you know, the big solution to our gun violence problem. And I guess the last thing I'll say on this point is, in my recent testimony in the Senate, I closed with this, is that if we want to effectively tackle America's gun violence problem, we need to focus on the root causes of violence, right? And the root cause of violence is not the gun or any other weapon or tool or, you know, weapon. It's very much about what is causing criminals or the mentally ill to reach this point in their lives where they go and commit a crime. Because if, like, and I guess like one argument is this: if anti-gunners ever reached their panacea and literally were able to ban and confiscate every single firearm in America, we would still have violence.
Yep.
And it would just switch right from firearms to some other type of weapon, like, right, bats and knives and hammers and fists. And so the tackling the gun side of things is not going to actually reduce the root causes of violence. And so, you know, the root causes of violence are many. It taps into socioeconomic issues, right? Poverty, lack of educational opportunities, and medical and mental health resources, and ultimately just a lack of humanity.
Yes.
Right? It's like when you have a lack of humanity, you just don't care about people, you don't care about society, and if you kill them, right, so what, right? But that's the problem, right? If people have a lack of humanity, then they're just going to go and commit whatever heinous crimes, right, that they want to go commit. So how do we, as people, and this is really about community, right? Like having strong community units that support people, right? So
Yes.
the communities are the safety net, right? And when I say community, I use that in the most loosest sense, right? Where your community might be your family. But if you have a terrible or non-existent family, well, you could have your friends. But if you don't have friends, right, it could be your faith, it could be your coworkers, right? But the community comes in so many forms. And so, yeah, really we need to focus on these core root causes of violence. And, you know, that for me is really what will help make our country a safer place.
I think you're spot on. So with that said, you know, we're going to wrap it up here. And is there anything you want to get out, anything you're working on, anything you just want people to be aware of?
Yeah, I guess the last thing I'd like to quickly chat about is, you know, we had over 8 million new gun owners in 2020, and a large percentage of those new gun owners are Asian Americans, which is incredibly encouraging. I think the Asian American population is really just waking up to the notion that the Second Amendment is for them and for us, just like it is all Americans. And it's whether you like this or not, it often takes somebody of a certain race or ethnicity, nationality, or gender to say the thing. Like, I'll just say, right, like gay people are more likely to listen to a gay person saying, hey, right, you should consider buying a gun, so you don't become a victim of a hate crime, right? But coming from a gay person like me, is this going to generally be more impactful than if a straight person's like trying to say that to a gay person? And so with Asians, it's the same thing. It's like, hey, you know, I want to, you know, continue reaching out to the Asian, you know, community, anybody right there who's, you know, willing and wanting to listen. And, you know, the last thing that I'll say is, you know, for anyone who is a new gun owner or knows a new gun owner, that is looking to learn, right, how to shoot safely and accurately, my book Shoot to Win is a really fantastic resource for the new shooter, and also for anyone who has been shooting and wants to refine their skills. And basically, I took all of the best practices from my Top Shot training experience and the things that I've learned over the years on how to become one of the best shooters, and put that in my book Shoot to Win. So I want to put that resource out there for again, all those new shooters, new gun owners that we saw in 2020, and this year is looking to be very much a lot of the same, with gun sales through the roof right now, and more Asians more than ever, right, are flocking to gun stores to protect themselves from this ongoing violence, which I hope ends very, very soon.
All right. Well, so I didn't even know you had a book. Shoot to Win is what it's called, correct?
Correct. Yeah. And so, you can buy it on Amazon, the iTunes, bookstore, or really anywhere books are sold. So yeah, Shoot to Win.
I'm going to have to check that out for myself. Well, thank you, Chris, for joining me today. It was an absolute honor to have you on, and I really appreciate you taking the time to just.
My pleasure. Thank you again for having me on your show, and stay safe out there. And thanks again.
All right. You too, man. This is your host, Brad. Unfortunately, we don't have any advertisers at the moment. Thankfully, Patreon has us covered. As most people are aware, social media entities across the internet are clamping down on the ability for gun-related content producers to fund their projects. Your support on Patreon gives those of us here at the Second Amendment Liberal podcast the ability to keep the lights on. As this project grows, expect interviews with interesting and notable people in the gun world, reviews of cool gun-related products, and travel to locations around the country to get the scoop on stories that otherwise would be out of reach. I have big things planned for the future of this podcast, folks. For $3 a month, you can pledge your support on Patreon. As things develop and take off around here, there will be all sorts of tiers and perks. If you find yourself unable to support us monetarily, hey, that's cool. I understand. I know money is tight for many people right now, and I just appreciate you listening. Go to patreon.com/2A Liberal Podcast. The number 2, the letter A, Liberal Podcast, and become a patron today. Thank you very much for listening. And that's a wrap for today's episode. Thank you, everyone, for joining me, and I will see you next time.